Sorry to everybody if that did something weird. Moving my mic around. Sorry. Oh my god. I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. Oh my god, it's a disaster. I should have done this all beforehand, but I didn't. And now you all have to watch me fail. How you guys all doing today? I spent the day with a friend, hence no clip for the day. The clip that I did yesterday about our anti-work really blew up on BreadTube, which I gotta tell you, like, this is the funny part about doing this stream, and I think it's a lesson for life generally. You never know what's gonna catch. Right? Like, you can predict things and get an idea and all that kind of stuff, but like, usually when I post to BreadTube, it's just completely ignored. Every so often I'll get like the most snide comment possible. My work has been called fringe, or cringe rather, all that kind of stuff. And but for whatever reason, you post on this anti-work controversy, right? You post about what's going on there, and people are eating it up. They're eating it up. It's like my most upvoted video on that particular subreddit. Pretty happy about it, honestly. I've gotten a whole bunch of subscribers because of it. Sure, I'm going to lose about half of them. That's usually what happens with these spike ups. I'll get like a big influx. It especially happens if I do anything musically, like if I make a song or something. Major, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. When I'll make like a song or a music video kind of a thing, especially about protests or something, and liberals love that. They love that shit, right? Because they're all about performance and presentation, right? And then they actually start seeing my content and start seeing who I am and what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, this guy doesn't like liberals. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Get the fuck out of here. So I suspect the same thing will happen. But in terms of the news, I mean, again, feels like we're in another one of these, like, constipation moments, right? Like, everything is, like, the table is set. There are going to be dramatic events that occur. Like, that's certainly the case. Like, the truckers, for example, right? The truckers are going to land in Ottawa on Saturday. I, of course, am doing Capitalism on Saturday, so I won't be able to directly report on it as it's happening. I won't be able to really get to it till Monday. And it could really turn into a non-event. Like, my question, like, this is my question. Like, it's becoming pretty firmly established that these trucking protests, like this trucker protest, is a far right movement. There is lots and lots of connections, lots of photographs coming out. Take a look at the people who are coming out to these protests, for God's sakes. We've got pictures of people wearing Nazi SS uniforms, things like this. And my question, if I was police forces, if I was security, what are they bringing in these trucks? Right? Like, you're telling me they're coming in trucks. Well, what's in the trucks? Right? Like, that's the question that I would be asking. Because, like, you can haul a lot of stuff in a truck, right? And and I'm getting kind of nervous that anything I see on social media that's coming out of this group, it's all about, like, prepping. It's all about, we're doing this for us, we're coming together and unifying, right? Like, but it's all the stuff that, like, an abusive spouse would say right before they do something to harm their spouse, right? So, like, is it going to be that they show up and they make a fuss and there's, like, a big presentation and it's like a galvanizing moment for them, right? Or is it, like, is this going to be something more significant? Is this going to be something serious? So we're caught in that kind of temporal thing. Vince, how you doing? Time to yellow vest and abolish capitalism. Like, yeah, like, it is time to get organized. It's time to get connected to groups that are actually fighting for something that is intrinsic and matters. Because you see how hard groups are fighting for stuff that's not as relevant, frankly. Like, there are some communists I know in the convoy, so it is for sure cross-party support. But the mainstream media, of course, focuses on the PPC side. I roll. Okay, interesting. Vince coming in with another perspective. One that, yeah, you're right. Like, that is not getting presented by the mainstream media for sure. Well, and also I think that's because the far-right elements are more visible, right? Like, I'm not seeing any communist flags, right? I'm not seeing any big communist symbols. And there's likely a reason for that. Like, I know that I have gone into groups that I would consider right-wing. Maybe not far-right, but right-wing. And if they see that I've got, like, my little symbol, right? The Canadian flag with the communist sickle in it. If they see that, that's it. I'm out, right? I'm just out of the conversation completely. They literally will no longer listen to me. And it's like, okay. Oh yeah, sorry, JC. I had work to do. I had to. I'm in the midst of a recording project, and I had to record like 3 chapters and then go to sleep. Sorry, JC. And the let's get the truckers to add wealth tax and $25 minimum wage on the list. I mean, yeah. This is kind of what I'm talking about. Like, these truckers are like, what are they actually fighting for? Like, what's this push all about? They keep talking about how tyrannical Justin Trudeau is and all of this. And it's, but like, they're not, they don't seem to have any specific demands. They don't seem to have any specific things that they're begging for or calling for or anything like that. And it's just like, you know, reopen. Okay. Like, because things were so much better before, right? Like, before, like, and it's simply not going to work. Like, there's just no comprehension, it seems, that, like, the wages are no longer paying the rents. Like, what's happening is obscene. Like, it's grotesque what's occurring. And these truckers are going out, and what are they protesting about? Get back to Denny's. Like, that's what it's about. Like, I'm not seeing any calls for, like, the abolishment of poverty or the attempts to alleviate poverty or the attempts to deal with these crises, right? In their view, the way that you deal with crises is reopen the economy and everybody just gets jobs, right? Like, that's how it goes. Yeah, all restrictions lift. Like, I mean, but it's not going to work. Like, that's the thing that I think is ridiculous about it. Is like, if you lift all the restrictions, right? Like, it doesn't mean that the wages pay the rent all of a sudden, right? It doesn't incentivize the workers to go back to work because the wages don't pay the rent, right? Like, the structure of capital has now aligned itself to guarantee its own failure, and it's not realigning itself. And it won't matter if you reopen it. So it's like a storm in a teacup, and it just has all of the signs of being an organizational party for the far right, right? Like, it's got all the signs of that. And I'm not, like, I'm not blown away to hear that there are people who consider themselves communists or leftists who are also doing that kind of stuff. Yeah, after you sided with my prop yesterday, too. I'll just stop coming. Okay, JC. Like, I hope you're well. Honestly, like, I told you the truth about what I saw. Like, he's a young man. He's figuring it out. My neighbor is a 50-year-old Green Party supporter who's literally third cousins with May, and she joined the convo. My neighbor is a 50-year-old Green Party supporter who's literally third cousins with May. She joined the convoy. I mean, third cousins, like, that's pretty far down the pipe. He's 31? Oh, he presents as if he's like 25. He seems 25 to me. And he presents as a young man, which is, I mean, good for him. He's going to get a lot of energy because of that. Yeah, the communists aren't as vocal, that's for sure. But they are there. How's the recording process? Good. I think I'm going to be finished the bulk of it today. And then there's just like the fine tuning and getting the titles and all that. But like the story I'll be finished with today. It's been quite a week. It's been quite a process. And it's so funny because like the thing that has definitely slowed me down has been my dog. And now that I've passed him over to my ex, the project's going to be over. Like, so right when I needed him to not be here, it was inverted from what it should have been. But so it slowed me down quite a bit because I think about like when I finished the stream, like I could just like pop right into it normally. But with him around, I got to kind of wrangle him, make sure everything's good. So he like really slows me down. But yeah, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be recorded soon. Hopefully it'll be up sometime next month, right? It's just got to go through the process, a bit of a vetting or any of that kind of stuff. And I mean, I'll pitch it on the show when it's ready, but I'm gonna warn you guys, right? It's gay erotica. There's no sidestepping it. So if that's not your thing, maybe don't worry about it. Yeah, demand a 2K serb immediately. Yeah, absolutely. I know how men JC, it has nothing to do with that, dude. Like, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. Like, that's a rough thing to say. Like, that's really rough. Oh, Jackson Hinkle's 22? Yeah, that's about right. He seems 22 to me. Sam Cedar's 55. When's the book coming out? What's the title of it? The title is Broken Boy. It's I don't know when it's coming out, but I expected it to be like gay porn. That's what I expected it to be. It's actually more than that, though. Like, it's closer to romance. It's just like, unlike a typical romance novel, when it comes time for the sex to occur, it's explicit. Whereas a romance novel would take you to it and then kind of like gracefully like leave it to the imagination. This certainly does not. But the story itself and the characters themselves is actually quite interesting. It's an exploration of abuse. It's an exploration of leaving an abusive relationship. It's a very and I think the characters are strong and well established, so it's good. But it's not the truth, JC. Like, I don't really understand what's happening right now, JC. Honestly, like, sorry I didn't come to your stream. Like, I have a life. I've got things to do. I'm actually ridiculously busy, and like Jackson, like. I think Jackson didn't come off very well in that Sam Cedar thing. Like, and honestly, I think it's already over. Like, Sam Cedar forgot about it. Like, it's already done, and Hinkle is moving on from it. He's going to use it as the stepping stone that it is. Yeah, and he's a young man. He'll figure it out. Anyhow, let's get into the number draw. It's Friday today, guys, so I'm taking it nice and easy, nice and chill. It's fuck around Friday. So let's do what we got here. What do we got?
Here we go for today's number. It's January 28, 2022.
I'm going to go with balls. A 5.
Each ball has a number. Numbers 1 through 10.
I didn't sign with Propaganda Live. What are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about.
Pick a number.
What did I say, 5? Yo, Major's in with me. We're going with the 5s together. You and me, Major. We're doing it.
Today's number is...
We're doing it.
5.
We're doing it, bud. We're doing it. Look at that. Look at that. Right? Unify. Unify. That's what happened last time. Is that 2 in a row for me? Mocked in late with the 7, as always. Not today, Mocked. Not today. Look at that, Major. You and me. Let's go get those scratch tickets. Let's go get that stuff. Right? All right. All right. It's sociopathic to keep boasting about an economy that is making a privileged few rich, while many are dying, getting sick, and drowning in medical debt. Oh, yeah, man. That's absolutely the truth. Like, there are people in the society that are absolutely boasting about this economy. And it's like, what are you even talking about? Like, what are you even talking about? There are enormous problems going on with this economy. You've got to be really thick. You got to be really thick to think that things are going well. And you just know that there's going to be like a reopening moment, or there's going to be something, and the stonk line is going to go up because stonks. And suddenly all of the news stations will be like, oh, the economy is going so well. Look at this economy. And like people will be just getting thrown into the streets, right? Because like the concerns of the populace are not the concerns of the ruling class, right? The concerns of the proletariat are not the concerns of the bourgeoisie. That we are going to be abandoned by these people, and they simply don't care, right? You can see about what Trudeau is up to, right? Like, he's not doing anything about this. Like, that's the thing that I think makes it the scariest, right? Is that there's nothing being done. There's nothing serious actually happening, right? Like, what's seriously happening? So, rents can only increase. Housing costs can only increase. Wages aren't increasing, right? Inflation is going out of control. Price gouging is going out of control. And the Trudeau Liberals are doing nothing about it. Because they simply don't care. Because they're trundling their way towards this great reset back to feudalism, right? Like, that's what we're experiencing. Too late, too late. Paul, don't know if I ever saw you here, Paul. Good to see you. Hope you're here to participate, bud. Does anyone know if the Flu Trucks clan made it to Ottawa yet? No, it's Saturday it's supposed to land in, near as I know. Near as I know, Paul. Which is funny because it's like a day I don't stream. I don't stream Saturday, Sunday because I'm caught up in capitalism on those days. And so I gotta wait until Monday until I can actually do anything about it. We'll see how it all goes. My gut feeling is that it's going to be like a hoopla, but I think there is like people are nervous. I think there's a nervousness amongst the populace that this could be like a January 6th moment, right? Like you could have people storming into the halls of power, storming into Parliament, all of these sorts of things. Like, what's in those trucks? Right? This is a question I keep hearing over and over again, right? Like, what's in those trucks? You know? Like, there's no way those trucks are just empty. Does anyone know if the Flu Trucks clan... Why am I reading that? Yeah, you can tell I'm tired, right? I'm having a tired one today. I'm kind of a relaxing day today, honestly. Gotta keep it that way. An economy involves the circulation of wealth and resources. Yeah, exactly. If resources aren't circulating, like it's the reason why the currency has to collapse, right? Because it's not circulating. It's just being funneled into these dead pools, right? Yeah, if all your wealth and all your resources are owned by a single person, the economy dies. Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be a single person. It's like if it's a small group of people, right? Like, and it's happening. Like, do you like burgers and fries? I'm gluten intolerant, so I can't have burgers anymore unless it's a gluten-free bun. But yeah, of course, who doesn't love a good burger and fry? So this gets posted in. I want to get through this one because it's worth. Like, Jordan Peterson goes on Joe Rogan's podcast, and really shows everybody that he's been completely bought. Like, it's pretty obvious now. And The Guardian publishes this article, which I'm going to read. Word salad of nonsense. Scientists denounce Jordan Peterson's comment on climate models. Speaking on Joe Rogan's podcast, Peterson claimed the climate was too complex to be modeled accurately, which was quickly shot down by scientists. This is by Graham Redfern, published on the 27th of January. Leading climate scientists have ridiculed and criticized comments made by controversial Canadian psychologist and author Jordan Peterson during an interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. During a new 4-hour interview on Spotify's most popular podcast, Peterson, who is not an expert on climate change, claimed that models used to forecast the future state of the climate couldn't be relied on. Peterson told Rogan that because the climate was so complex, it couldn't be accurately modeled. He said another problem that bedevils climate modeling too, which is that as you stretch out the models across time, the errors increase radically. And so maybe you can predict about a week or 3 weeks or a month or a year, but the farther out you predict, the more your model is in error. And that's a huge problem when you're trying to model over 100 years because the errors compound just like interest. Peterson said that if the climate was about everything, then your models aren't right, because they couldn't include everything. But climate scientists have described Peterson's comments as stunningly ignorant, and said that he had fundamentally misunderstood the concept of climate modeling. Dr. Sarah Perkins Kirkpatrick, a climate scientist at the University of New South Wales, Canberra, said Peterson's descriptions of how climate models work was fundamentally wrong. While weather forecasts do become less accurate the further out they go, this was a different process to climate modeling. He seems to think we model the future climate the same way we do the weather. He sounds intelligent, but he's completely wrong. He has no frickin' idea, she said. I mean, this is basically, he sounds intelligent, but he's completely wrong. That's Peterson. The backlash from scientists comes as Spotify removes the music of veteran songwriter Neil Young after the singer issued an ultimatum to the company. Young was furious at what he described as misinformation spread on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast about the COVID-19 pandemic. Rogan's show has previously aired claims by a different guest that hospitals are financially incentivized to falsely diagnose deaths of having been caused by COVID-19, and that world leaders had hypnotized the public into supporting vaccines. You can have Rogan or Young, not both, Young wrote in a letter to his management. According to Spotify, which paid $100 million for exclusive rights to Joe Rogan's podcast in 2020, the platform has 381 million users and 172 million subscribers. Rogan tops the platform's podcast charts in the UK, USA, and Australia. Dr. Gavin Schmidt, a climate modeler and senior advisor at NASA, said on Twitter, "Guys, for the love of everything holy, please have somebody on who knows what the heck a climate model is." Schmidt told The Guardian he was reminded of a quote from the famous British statistician George Box. Peterson has managed to absorb the first part of George Box's famous dictum that all models are wrong, but appears to have not worked out the second part. But some are useful, Schmidt said. Professor Steve Sherwood on the Climate Change Research Center at the University of New South Wales said Peterson was making the ancient climate skeptic error of mixing up weather and climate. Anyone who has taken an introductory course in climate or atmospheric science would spot this problem, he said. Errors in weather forecast indeed accumulate, such that after a couple of weeks the forecast is useless. But with climate, Sherwood said, the models work differently to project how the climate will respond to different factors, such as higher levels of CO2. Peterson's argument is like saying we can't predict whether a pot of water on a flame will boil because we decide in advance what variables to put in our model, and we can't predict each bubble. Sherwood said the laws of thermodynamics and some basic calculations are enough to give scientists confidence in the projections. Professor Christian Jacob, a climate modeling expert at Monash University, said Peterson's comments were ill-informed and that he'd mixed up weather prediction with climate projections. People are entitled to their opinions, but science and climate modeling isn't about opinion. If you're not well informed about how something is done, then it's not right to make comments about it on a large platform. Professor Michael Mann, an atmospheric scientist at Penn State University, said Peterson's comments, and Rogan's facilitations of them, was an almost comedic type of nihilism that would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous. Peterson's claim that the climate was too complicated showed a total lack of understanding of how science works, and could be used to dismiss physics, chemistry, biology, and every other field of science where one formulates conceptual models according to man. Every great discovery in science, including the physics that allowed Peterson and Rogan to record and broadcast their ridiculous conversation, has arisen through that process, he said. For what it's worth, we've been projecting future warming since the first climate models in the late 1960s, early 1970s. We can look back to see how well they have performed. Turns out our models did a generally good job. Professor John Abraham, a climate scientist at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, said the episode was a word salad of nonsense spoken by people who have no sense when it comes to climate. To say that climate model errors increase like compound interest is laughable. Jordan Peterson displays a near complete misunderstanding of climate change and the tools climate scientists use to understand what is happening to our planet. It's as if someone, with zero expertise and knowledge, made comments about something he knows little about. Earlier this month, 270 experts wrote to Spotify demanding it establish a clear and public policy to moderate misinformation on its platform, after raising concerns about pandemic misinformation on a different episode of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Mass information events of this scale have extraordinarily dangerous ramifications, the experts wrote, saying the podcast had an estimated 11 million listeners. So what's happening to Peterson is exactly what's happening to the Western world. That the Western world isn't going to go down quietly like Peterson's not going down quietly, right? It's going to destroy itself. And it's going to embarrass itself. It's going to lose every fight it takes. And it's going to take those fights with gusto and bluster. And it's going to come out the other side looking very stupid. Very, very stupid indeed. Which I'm glad that this article in The Guardian exists, because I know that there have been many commentators who have been talking about that particular podcast indeed. But this article, in my view, is as simple as it gets, right? Self-imposed century of humiliation, here we come. That's exactly right, Oddity. That's exactly what we're preparing for, and we need to be serious about it, and we need to talk about it openly, and discuss what can be done about it, and do things about it, because what we are doing is self-imposed, and it's going to continue this way. Even if we as a people decided to stop it now and started to work against it now, and we're doing serious things now, we would still be impacted by it. So the fact that we are completely ignoring it, the fact that we're still listening to the grifters like Trudeau, like Biden, who are trying to pretend as though they actually care when they don't, means that we are going to pivot towards a far-right movement. And it is perhaps preventable here in Canada, perhaps. I don't see it happening in the United States. I think the pivot back to republicanism, back to the crazed nonsense, is an inevitability. I would prefer it wasn't. But the reality is if people have to choose between the person who says they're going to punch you in the face and then does versus the person who says they're not going to punch you in the face and then does, they're going to pick the person who says they're going to punch you in the face and then does. I think COVID attacks the genitals because I got it last week and now my sex drive dropped to nothing. You might want to talk to your doctor about that one, bud. Why did I read that comment out loud? I gotta vet these comments. I gotta vet these comments a little better, man. Just going in there being So that's Peterson. And of course, China jails almost 50 steel executives for faking emissions data. Right? This is Bloomberg. China will jail 47 steel company officials for faking air pollution data. It's a sign that Beijing's crackdown on firms that are flouting environmental rules is intensifying. So let me be extremely clear about what I think about Jordan Peterson lying the way that he did in front of the nation, right? That this puts him in the same position as the people who are named in the climate deception dossier. For decades, we have experienced disinformation and misinformation campaigns designed to lie about the nature of climate change. This has slowed down our transition away from fossil fuels by decades. That for decades, we were constantly finding ourselves in a media discussion that was both sidesing the argument between the people who had done the research and understood the subject versus people who were actively funded by the fossil fuel industry. And these were presented to us as if they were equivalent and the same. The BBC itself had to release a statement saying that they were going to stop this practice, right? So this isn't a conspiracy of any sort. This is an admission by the media centers themselves that this is how they were reporting on it, and that they were going to stop doing that, and that they were going to report on climate changes if it was real and factual, because they understood that the jig was up. We were seeing through it, and the protest movement was very aware that that was the case. But now we're in a period of managed dissent, right? Now we're in a period where the politicians are just saying, yeah, sure, we hear you, we care, climate change is real, all of that kind of stuff. We're not going to do anything about it. In fact, we're going to make the problem worse. And that's where we are now, which is leading me very much to the position where the only group of people who I will trust at all in regards to the climate change conversation are the people who arrest these people who have spread disinformation, who have lied to us, who have actively worked to deceive us for money. The only people I will trust are people who arrest these people and incarcerate them, and at this point I include Peterson on that list. Yes, we have to actually say these things and actually believe them. Like, what they have done to us is treason, and it is treasonous to stand up and lie to the public in order to destroy it for your own personal gain. Like, it's unacceptable. And there are nations on the planet who are doing exactly what I'm suggesting, which is don't allow psychopaths to lie to you about things that are crucially important to the national security of the nation. Climate change is a national security issue, but in huge and enormous ways. And the fact that it isn't discussed that way is embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the West. That when it comes to destroying other countries, when it comes to invading other countries, when it comes to stealing oil, when it comes to stealing resources, when it comes to going into territories and creating genocide and murdering everybody, right? In places that have no military, that have no navy, that have no air force, that have no space program, that have no nuclear missile program, that have no way to actually defend themselves, and even have no way to create a antagonizing force powerful enough to even cross the ocean to threaten the United States. When it comes to those sorts of things, we've got infinite money, infinite power, infinite wealth, and everything is considered of national security importance. But when it comes to the very fact that what we're doing is turning the universe against us, like, the planet is going to eat us, right? It's going to destroy us. That's what's going to happen. Places will begin to burn down like Lytton burnt down, right? That we aren't going to be able to transition easily. We're not going to be able to flip on our air conditioners, right? Like, the heat will be so oppressive that it will melt us. Like, it is not hyperbolic to say this, that the heat will overwhelm our technology and burn our cities down, right? Like, this is what is coming for us. Right? This is what is coming for us. And the people who have been lying to us about it this whole time, Peterson included, should be incarcerated. Right? They should be put on trial, and they should be at bare minimum incarcerated for their fraudulent lies. Like, we need to stop doing what we're doing. We need to treat climate change like the national security issue that it is. We need to recognize that the military and the militarization of our society is the number one cause of this. And if we don't actually take this shit seriously, Well, the fossil fuel guys take it seriously. They seriously want to deceive and lie to us so that they can destroy the planet for their own personal profit. Like, that's what's happening. It is the movie Don't Look Up, and the comet is coming and is going to hit us. Like, and at this point, it is obvious. Yeah, abolish NATO, man. Like, yeah, like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, like it has no reason to exist. Truly. Like, it truthfully doesn't really have a reason to exist. Like, especially as it's going around acting like a fascist organization, like overthrowing governments. Like, no one is commenting at all in the mainstream media. Even people who are opposed to what's happening in Ukraine. Like, recently I saw a thing where AOC came out and made a statement that was not supportive of what the United States is doing in Ukraine. But no one is mentioning the fact that there was a fucking coup in 2014, right? Like, the entire conversation is being done as if it's oh, those poor Ukrainians are being subjugated to warfare by the Russians and we're defending against Russian aggression, right? That's the narrative. But the reality is that we overthrew that government, the democratically elected Ukrainian government. We overthrew it, installed our own leadership, and from there have been funding proxy groups like the Azov Battalion, this neo-Nazi group, so that they can do what? Go to war with fucking Russia and try to blow up the Belt and Road Initiative. That's what it's about, right? So, and look how easy you can do that. Look how easy you can create that narrative, right? You can create that narrative so simply by all you've got to do, right? All you've got to do is pretend like that coup didn't happen, right? Just omit that, and suddenly you can turn it into this conversation about, oh, the Russians are invading. Well, why else would there be all those problems and all this kind of stuff, right? Certainly isn't us, right? And that's all they've got now. Like, all they've got is the lie of omission. Like, for anyone with eyes to see, like, and it's not hard to find this stuff out, like basic history, like basic world events. Like, it's just, we don't really do that. Because it does take time. What are some good subreddits to join and watch? Our Ontario is an absolute disaster. I wish subreddits were hopeful, nice, and kind. Honestly, Vince, for you, I think head over to Jen Zedong. These guys, right? The conversations that I have had on this subreddit are adult conversations, right? There's like, if there is like the kind of glib dismissiveness, it's always done with a spirit of camaraderie and solidarity. It's more like gentle ribbing than anything else. If you make errors and cop to them, right? People love that. If you point out someone's error, they'll admit it if it is indeed an error. There's none of the shittiness or the backbiting, and they're trying more than any other subreddit I've ever seen. They're trying to live in the truth. They're trying to find out what the truth is, where it lies. It is explicitly anti-American imperialism, like, absolutely. But in terms of like, if you want to join a real solidarity movement that's loaded with people who know what the fuck they're talking about the subject of Marxism, you're looking at Jen Zedong. For sure. It's a easy recommend. And like, what I also like about it is that it's not, like, there are other subreddits like Our Communism, right? Or even Our Send in the Tanks, which are more theory-based, but they take themselves too seriously, if you ask me. They're very smart, they're very intelligent, they want to keep people informed, all that kind of stuff. But Jen Zedong is like, yeah, we do all that too, but here's some fun memes, you know? Like, so it's a real nice mix of a lot of different stuff, full of really good people, if you ask me. Really, really good people. And you can ask serious questions and get some pretty serious resources from these guys. Like, when I got suspicious of the 30 million people dead in China because of famine in the 1960s, when I got suspicious of that narrative, it was Jen Zedong that I turned to and was asking them about that. And they're the ones that sent me to the resources that really showed the fraudulent nature of that narrative, right? And like, really obvious shit. Like, these guys are pointing out really obvious shit. Like, somebody will say, like, 5 million kids a day, or 5 million people a day, or 5 million people a year are dying. And they're like, okay, let's do the calculations on that. Oh, if it's 5 million people a day, then that means the population of the country would already be dead. Like, it's ridiculous. What is going on in the US, Turkey, Ukraine, Russia? Complete joke. Yeah, absolutely, dude. I don't watch TV. I'm not much for news. If I do get any news, it's Reddit. So in other words, 100% of my news streams are from Reddit. Someone posted this in Reddit. I have no faith anymore. I mean, it's not terrible. Like, I mean, it depends on the streams that you follow. Like, if you're following like the general news or any of that kind of stuff, it does pay off to go around and actually pay attention to like the actual, like, go to the Atlantic, the Guardian, the Intercept, go to the Globe and Mail, go to the National Post, like, go to these places. But more or less, I have found that like the really important articles tend to be the ones that surface, that you can dig around a little bit deeper and find some stuff. But I am not necessarily opposed to the idea of people getting their news from aggregate sites. But again, though, because the trouble with Reddit and the trouble with all of this social media stuff is that you can just get bubbleized really easy. You can live in what's called an intellectual ghetto, right? You can just be surrounded and get into that echo chamber really, really easily. And commentators like Chomsky pointed out that like that didn't really used to be the case. Like, everybody read the same newspaper, right? Like, and the news was there, and everybody read the same kind of thing. But now it's like, now there are established media outlets that are for the right-wing perspective, that are specifically only talking to a very small niche group of people, and that makes it easy for people to ignore the wider array of information, right? So that can definitely happen on Reddit, and it's something that I am always concerned about myself. I think about that fairly regularly. Like, am I closing myself off? Am I trying to, and like, what's the solution then, right? Like, get more. I actually do think that there should be certain social media, like on Reddit, for example, there should be certain things that you can't unsubscribe from. Like, you should be subscribed to our news. I think that everybody like every Reddit account should just have that, and it's like, too bad. Like, no, like, you have it, right? Like, there needs to be some kind of common understanding about what's going on in the world. But Reddit itself is an imperfect thing because it's all done by volunteer mods, and who are these mods anyway? It's all got the smackings of like, let the free market decide, right? And it's like, well, then anybody can be anybody and anything can be said, right? If you were a millionaire, would you hire someone to be your personal chef? No. I'd probably start giving my money away at $1 million. Like, once I've got the house and once I've got like the basics kind of set out for myself, I have no intention of hoarding wealth. I have no intention of doing any of that. I'd probably just start giving my money away. Like, I've seen enough data now. I know what happens to a person if they accrue a large sum of wealth. Like, I've seen it in my own personal life with the people who are around me. I've seen it in a figure like Joe Rogan. Like, I've seen his transition into having this obscene kind of wealth. I've read the studies. I know what happens. And the cure is to just start giving your money away. And so I wouldn't hire someone to be my personal chef. I don't think I've got the stomach for that. I would probably just give my money. Just probably start handing it out. Jed Zedong has hands down the best solidarity within a sub I've ever seen. Yeah, the other sub I've been on has salt and infighting to some degree. Not this sub, though. Yeah, like, that's what's very impressive about Jed Zedong, is that there isn't really the backbiting that you see or the insults that you see. Like, and I really like that. I can't really tolerate that. Like, I don't really want to give people the time of day when they start getting into that kind of mode. Right? Like, when when people start accusing me of things, right? The kind of snide digging accusatory commentary. Like, you saw it last night, right? There was the troll fellow who was on here who is just like making declarative statements about me. It's like, don't make declarative statements about the people you're talking to. Like, it seems pretty like communication 101, right? If you're making a declarative statement about somebody else, chances are good you're wrong and you're making yourself look stupid, and making yourself look stupid to the person, certainly, because it's basic logic, right? Like, you are making a declarative statement about someone else who you likely know nothing about, right? And the proof that you know nothing, and so you're proving to the person you're talking to that you're completely willing to make declarative statements about subjects you're ignorant about. Like, that's what it is. Like, so if you say, like, you're just a shill for China, well, you don't know anything about me, right? That's and so that's a declarative statement. So all you're really proving to me is that you're willing to make declarative statements about subjects you know nothing about, right? I see it all the time. So that's why, like, so some people who come in here, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, what am I supposed to do about the trolls that come in, right? What am I supposed to do? And I think I've created a system in mind now. I think I've got an idea of how I'd like it to go, right? I think it's as simple as time out, and then I'm going to pull the audience. I'm going to get you guys involved, pull the audience, see if we should ban this guy or not. Give him the chance to respond. Because the thing that drives me crazy about the trolls is that they gaslight, right? They gaslight and deflect. They won't answer base questions, right? They're not actually interested in communication. They're just interested in gumming up the conversation. And honestly, like, this is my channel, you know? Like, the thing that I love about this channel is talking to you guys. It's the number one, without a doubt. And if somebody's in the chat and making it tedious, like, yeah, get fucking banned. Like, that's why I actually really like Kate. Like, when Kate comes through, like, she's asking questions and she's pushing and she is throwing up barriers and blockades and things, but she's not tedious, right? She's not being tedious about it. And whereas some of the other people who have come in get really fucking tedious about it. Oleksiy Honcharuk attended a neo-Nazi Holocaust-denying concert in Kiev. Who is Oleksiy Honcharuk? Let's get that set up first. Just watch. It's going to be literally the president of Charuk, the former prime minister of Ukraine. See, I knew it. The president. Hold on. Former prime minister of Ukraine. But he's the former. He served as prime minister of Ukraine. Oh, that's good. Following a landslide parliamentary electric win, he was replaced. Yeah, like, these guys are ridiculous, right? Like, everything about this is just unbelievable to me. Like, so he was the prime minister of Ukraine from 2019 to 2020, following a landslide parliamentary election win, which, I mean, post-coup, like, all of these elections are bullshit post-coup, right? Like, they made it very clear that they're not going to let the leftists in. They're not going to let even centrists in. So who's actually voting in these elections, right? Like, that's my big question. Like, the United States and NATO have made it very clear. If you vote in, like, a left-wing, like, liberal type, we'll just coup them. We'll just overthrow them, right? And what's going on in the United States, or what's going on in Ukraine, is unreal, right? It's unreal. Yeah. Like, and the very fact that there are neo-Nazi Holocaust-denying concerts going on in Kiev, right? Like, really think about that. Like, imagine your city had a concert for neo-Nazi Holocaust deniers, right? Like, you would have some big questions about that event, I think, right? And yet, if you're that type of person, you can become the fucking prime minister of Ukraine, right? Unreal, man. Unreal. And, like, this is what we're supposed to be, like, rah-rahing all about, right? So we're witnessing the rise of Nazism yet again, right? And like always, we're funding it. Very simply, like, we're funding it. If we wanted to stop it from happening, right? If we wanted to stop it from happening, we should very simply stop funding it. If I met a Ukrainian person here in Canada, how likely do you think they'd be a chud? Well, like, the Ukrainian people have definitely like the Ukrainians who made it here to Canada and the United States came here because most likely because of the collectivization of the farms in the Soviet Union, right? That the farm collectivization that occurred during that period of time really affected the Ukrainians the most. And so they're always going to have an anti-Soviet vibe about them because they're the ancestors of the kulaks, right? Like, they're the ancestors of the private farm holding capitalists who are maintaining the system of capital, who basically went to war against Stalin when he attempted to collectivize the farming industry, when he attempted to nationalize and collectivize it. And so, of course, they're going to have... And like, I'm actually quite gentle with Ukrainians I meet because of this. Because it's their family line. Like, you really genuinely are talking about their grandfather, that kind of thing, right? So I try to be gentle about it. But, like, my position is that the leader of the country has every right to reorganize the organizational structure of the industry that is responsible for fueling the nation, right? Like, monarchs do it, capitalists do it. Like, every society on the planet reorganizes their industry as they need to. And so Stalin has every right, as the leader of the Soviet Union, to do this. And I think what shocked him was how, like, he knew there was going to be pushback. He understood that, but I don't think he understood the suicidal nature of it, the, like, self-destructive nature, right? He didn't get that that capitalists will destroy their own shit just to make sure you don't get it. That's what happened with the kulaks, right? That, like, once Stalin moved to collectivize it, the kulaks burnt down their own crops and murdered their own capitals, right? Or their own cattle, rather. Ukrainians under Makhno collectivized the land of the kulaks, and Pomeshiks in the 1920s, it suddenly became a genocide when it's Russians doing it. Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. And, yeah, and, like, again, it's worth stating, like, the ruler of a nation has every right, legally, morally, ethically, to reorganize the society and reorganize industry for the benefit of the nation, right? Like, that's... You can have a debate as to whether or not it was successful, if you like, right? I mean, I think it was successful ultimately. But if you're going to have a debate as to whether or not Stalin had the right to do that, then you're having a very serious debate about, like, the nature of governing. Of course, Stalin has the right to nationalize and collectivize and reconfigure industry. Of course he does. He's the leader of the country, right? If Justin Trudeau decided to nationalize the fossil fuel industry, he would have every right to do so. If he decided to collectivize the farms, he would have every right to do so, right? Now, you could talk about, like, the political fallout if you want, right? You could talk about its effectiveness if you like, but what you can't talk about is whether or not he has the right to do so. And Ukrainians don't want to hear that, right? They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about, like, the legitimacy of Stalin's position. Because it's not theoretical for them. Like, that's the thing, right? It's in their family, right? It's what they've been hearing for years from people they love and care about. And so when it comes to meeting, and I have met, like I'm from Manitoba, like I know Ukrainians. There are Ukrainian groups, right? A lot of politics makes more sense once you realize that that the Ukrainian bloc is actually quite strong in in Canada. And so how likely do I think they'd be a chud? I don't know about the chud part, but I do know that they're going to defend their own family legacy and their own family line, and they're not going to see their own family as doing anything negative, even if they did, right? Like, even if they did, even if it is the case that, like, they were the kulaks that were burning down their own crops and slaughtering their cattle to prevent the success of the collectivization movement and likely create the famine that occurred thereafter, right? Like, but they don't want to hear it that way. All they want to know is that Stalin's the bad guy, right? Stalin's the bad guy because he wanted to improve things for his society at the expense of the capitalist class, right? Who were the kulaks at the time. So if you ever do encounter a Ukrainian person in Canada, I just suggest tread lightly. Just tread lightly and be empathetic to their position, because they've got skin in the game. They've got skin in the game. That's what I've learned, right? Like I don't really have skin in the game when it comes to talking about the Soviet Union, which is, I think that helps to a degree. Like it helps keep me objective, I hope, right? It helps with the implicit bias problem, I hope. But you've got to respect it, that like people have family that are affected by this shit, right? It's not too much different when you're dealing with, like, when you're talking to the people, the Floridians, who are like, we got to go into Cuba and overthrow them. And you look at them and you're like, oh, like literally it was your father who owned slave plantations in Cuba and got thrown out of Cuba by the revolution. And now you, the son, is like, yeah, we should go back and get that land back so I can have my plantation slaves back. You know, it's not too much different than that. I think the only difference is that, like, the Ukrainians aren't going back. Like, they're not going to get their land back. Like, that conversation's over. Franco Terrazono, government workers made out well during the pandemic. Not a single federal or provincial government reduced pay during lockdowns, research says. These days, it seems there are 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and bigger paychecks for government employees. Even a pandemic that sent thousands of workers to the ranks of the unemployment couldn't stop the iron law of government wage increases. In fact, the pandemic has laid bare the divide between those living by the golden government gates that shield them from financial reality and the taxpayers who are on the hook to pay the growing tab. Right? You see the divisive language. You see how it's trying to separate government workers from regular workers, right? You're not a worker, you're a taxpayer, right? This is the reason I wanted to go through this. You can see how it's done, right? That it's not divided by worker and owner, right? It's not bourgeoisie and proletariat, right? Like that's not the divide. In fact, the divide is government worker and taxpayer worker. Right? And then there's another tier, which are the non-taxpayers. So this is how they divide our country, right? They take the workers and they divide them up into these categories, and we just gullibly fall for it over and over and over again, while completely ignoring the ownership class that is above us. During the pandemic, 347 federal and provincial government employees received at least one pay raise, according to government documents obtained by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, a far-right, like, misinformation. You want to talk about misinformation campaigns, you're talking about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, without a doubt. It's like a billionaire-funded, like, far-right, like, neoliberal establishment. Those growing salaries will come from the pockets of workers and small business owners, many of whom took pay cuts during lockdowns, lost their jobs, and were forced to close their doors. So this is just stated, right? It's just stated as if it's fact, right? those growing salaries will come from the pockets of workers. So you see how it's being divided, right? Government workers and then regular workers. Small business owners, the petty bourgeoisie, right? Many of whom took pay cuts during lockdowns, lost their jobs, or were forced to close their job. And this being said while corporate profits are soaring, right? CEO pay is skyrocketing. The billionaire class has made more money during this pandemic period than anyone else, right? Are they going to report on that? Are they going to report on that? Not a single federal or provincial government reduced pay during lockdowns, according to research from secondstreet.org. Are they even going to talk about the degree of this pay raise, right? Like lots of places have built-in pay raises, right? Like a 1% pay raise or something designed to keep up pace with inflation, right, is completely normal for government apparatus, right? So are they simply taking that and reporting on it as if it's like something new or different? Or is this just divisive propaganda designed to divide the populace? Many municipal employees are also riding the gravy train. We've heard the gravy train before, right? Here in Ontario, the Fords used the phrase the gravy train. The great irony of this situation was that they believed it so thoroughly that both Rob Ford and Doug Ford funded third-party organizations in order to go through the books and find the gravy so that they could cut it. And both of the reports came back and said, there is no gravy. Like, there's no wasted spending here. Like, everything is being spent properly. Everything is being appropriately sent to where it's supposed to go, given the rule set. Now, you can disagree on, like, certain policies. Like, the Fords disagree with the idea that people should have access to universal health care, for example. But you can't say that that's the gravy train, right? More than 34,000 employees of the City of Toronto received a raise. So how big a raise? Like a 0.5% raise, a 1% raise, a 0.1% raise, a 10% raise? How big's the raise? We're not going to know. Okay. So did nearly 14,000 city employees in Calgary and 11,400 in Ottawa. How many other municipalities handed out raises? Like, you see how desperate this is. Like, the only types of people who are going to read this and buy into it are people who are completely bought into the system, who are completely bought into the idea that we should hate on government employees, which, why would workers denigrate other workers? Good for them for getting raises. Like, why is that not the statement? What's the goal of this article, right? Is it, because from my perspective, like, yeah, fine, these people should have wages, right? And who should be paying for these government wages? Well, probably the people who have the bulk of the wealth, right? The people who own the society should probably pay for it, right? Given the emergency, it would have been perfectly fair for politicians to stop these raises, even ones built into contracts. What is unfair is making Canadians who took pay cuts or lost their jobs or businesses pay for these raises. Again, the billionaire class has made more money than they've ever made. Stopping the raises wouldn't have been rocket science. After all, politicians control the purse strings. If union bosses don't want to accept haircuts, let them hand out the pink slips to their members, straight up just advocating for the destruction of the public sector, right? Like, straight up just advocating, like, cut this, destroy this, right? Austerity. This is an argument for austerity, which is part of the larger goal of destroying the public sector so that they can privatize it, which we're seeing happen in front of our faces, like, almost every single day. And it's being explicitly done at this point. Like, this article is emblematic of it, right? That's the strategy former Alberta Premier Ralph Klein adopted in implementing a 5% wage reduction in the early 1990s when he had to extinguish Alberta's deficit fire. Yeah, and that's been a complete disaster for Alberta. We have 338 MPs. You'd think one of them would have been willing to take a stand against universal raises, but you'd be wrong. At the height of the pandemic, as the debt ballooned to the 1 trillion mark and beyond, Ottawa agreed to new contracts for thousands of its employees, and not a single MP objected. Yeah, I mean, it's odd that you want them to, right? Like, so we, the working class, should attack a section of the working class on behalf of who? For what purpose? To what end? Right? Over what? Like a 1% raise? Is that what we're talking about? It's a good bet many politicians haven't a clue how many bureaucrats received a raise during lockdowns. But they should, given the mess government finances are in and the fact that labor is government's biggest cost. Politicians should always consider taxpayers' ability to pay before rubber stamping raises. So this word taxpayer more and more means billionaire, right? Like that is ultimately what they're talking about. Like, of course the government has the ability to fund its own people, right? The government can create money, like, and the way that you balance that out is by taxing away inert money. And that's the billionaire class, which we don't even want to talk about. Yeah, privatization, a word coined by Czech's notes, the Nazis. Yeah. Like, the policies of Adolf Hitler have been widely successful for the establishment, right? Like, Adolf Hitler is the one who started this privatization movement, right? He was quite happy to do it, and we've adopted all of it. Then again, it would be tough for politicians to force a hard bargain when they've been helping themselves to raises. While you and yours struggled through COVID-19, your representative in Ottawa pocketed 2 pay increases. Backbench MPs are now receiving $6,900 more than they did during pre-pandemic, while prime ministers will pocket an extra $13,800. So the conflation between the government workers and the elected MPs, right? That like, one is a member of the working class and one is a courtier of the billionaire class. And the billionaires are more than happy to lump in the courtier class with the working class when it suits them, as they're doing now, right? And this also furthers the idea that we should attack government workers and treat them as if they are non-workers instead of treating them as if they are workers, which is what they are. And instead of celebrating their victories and celebrating their success and asking ourselves, why are we not having similar success? Why are we not living in kind of similar conditions? We're supposed to tear them down. That's the goal here. Get the working class to tear itself apart instead of coming together in solidarity to build itself up. And that's the narrative the Financial Post is putting forward. CTF supporters received correspondence from more than 100 MPs, Liberal, Conservatives, and New Democrats, who either didn't support the politician pay raise or committed to donating their own raise to charity. With all these MPs seemingly against the raises, why haven't we heard a peep from the party leaders about reversing the pandemic pay hikes? Taxpayers are also paying for more bureaucrats. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland claims we have recovered 106% of the jobs lost at the peak of the pandemic. But these new jobs come with a bigger tax bill for the private sector. Like, listen to them whine about the bigger tax bill for the private sector. Like, who gives a fuck at this point? The private sector has made more money during this pandemic period than all of these government workers, right? Than all this kind of stuff. Like, this article is actually quite embarrassing because it's like looking at the leak. To put it in biblical terms, it's pointing out the speck of dust in someone else's eye while ignoring the log in your own eye. That these people would defend the billionaire class and will and do. That's who they are, right? Even though that's what the problem is, right? All of the assets in the world minus all of the liabilities in the world, exactly zero. Yeah, I mean, but we're told it's not a zero-sum game by people who are fucking illiterate. There are 312,700 more government jobs across Canada than there were just before the pandemic. About 4.2 million in December versus only 3.9 in February, according to Stats Canada, including an extra 114,000 public administration bureaucrats. Over the same period, the number of jobs outside government fell by 80,000. Yeah, dude. Like, the government needs to pick up the slack when the private sector fails, right? And it is a when the private sector fails, because it's a system of abandonment, right? It's designed to abandon people. And any politician that has any intelligence in their head at all is like, yeah, we've got to make sure that people have access to at least the system that we have in place. That if the system we have is sell yourself to a labor market dominated by billionaires, well, And if that system starts rejecting people and starts throwing it out and starts creating homelessness and poverty, well, then we at least have to create jobs, right? Like at bare fucking minimum, right? Because the private sector is a system of abandonment. It's designed to abandon people. This follows years of growth in the number of federal bureaucrats. Between 2017 and 2021, the federal bureaucracy ballooned by 56,905 new employees. That's more than 14,000 a year. Politicians will soon be tripping over themselves, looking for more money to pay off huge debts they have incurred. They should start by looking in the mirror and forcing governments to find ways to save money, just as the rest of us have had to do with our own budgets, right? Like the implicit lie, right? Just as the rest of us have had to do with our own budgets. So the billionaire class simply doesn't exist in the conversation, according to the Financial Post, right? You see how fraudulent this is, right? It's extremely obvious that this is fraudulent. Like this isn't someone creating a political argument. This is a fraud attempting to do fraud on you. Just ignore the billionaire class. Do not talk about the billionaire class. Do not talk about the fact that billionaire wealth has skyrocketed through the roof. Do not address it. Don't communicate it whatsoever. Pretend as though everybody is in the same boat and everything that's happening is happening to everybody. Lie your face off, and then you can get your shit published in the Financial Post and be the president of the Canadian Taxpayers Association, right? Or Federation or whatever. Like, you're not, like, at this point, we really do have to look at these institutions, right? All of these institutions from the beginning. Like, we are not going through this in order to find the truth. We are looking at what these guys are saying to find out what the liars are saying. Like, the only reason to read the Financial Post and the National Post and the Globe and Mail and all of this is to find out what the liars are saying. That's it. And you can see it. It's writ large at this point. It's obvious. It's extremely obvious. And yet, these are the dominant forces that exist in our society. So hardly a shock that we're going into this period of decline. New data shows 61% rise in U.S. prison deaths in 2020. Only one media outlet reported on it. Amid wall-to-wall coverage of organized shoplifting, an unprecedented rise in deaths inside America's prisons, brought on by reckless COVID policy, is met with a collective yawn. A delayed release of statistics about U.S. federal and state prisons by the Bureau of Justice Statistics showed a startling increase in deaths from 2019 to 2020, from 4,200 to 6,100. This was despite an overall reduction in the prison population by almost 10%, from 600,000 in 2019 to 550,000 in 2020. This population decrease was due to the reduction of new admissions caused by a fall in crime rates during the 2020 lockdowns. The number of prisoners released actually went down. In absolute terms, this is a death increase of 46%. When adjusted for mortality rate, because the overall population was reduced, it's a total death increase of 61%, by far the highest rate since statistics have been kept on prison deaths. This, by all objective metrics, is a major scandal. In the early days of COVID, prison activists called for significant release of those incarcerated, just as countries like France, Iran, Germany, and Colombia had done, to prevent mass infections and death. Aside from some token releases that were later offset by new admissions, mayors and governors from both parties in the Trump White House ignored these pleas entirely. It was just going to be business as usual. News reports of mass infections and inadequate doctors and staff compounding what was already inadequate health care, and one-off stories about prisoners' deaths could be found here and there. But generally, the plight of the incarcerated during COVID was not an urgent issue for U.S. media. One media outlet, NPR, did report on this new data. On January 22nd, Michael Martin of All Things Considered interviewed Wendy Sauer from the Prison Policy Initiative, one of the few organizations monitoring and drawing attention to the crushing healthcare crisis in American prisons. The report, headlined "New Data Shows Startling Rise in Prison Deaths During 2020, detailed how deaths were up 46%. As mentioned earlier, when accounting for the reduction of prison population by 58,400, it's closer to 61%. And despite being bogged down by the typical NPR-esque sober tones, the report examined the role negligent COVID policies has had on the massive death toll. Had mortality rates remained the same as in 2019, the total number of deaths would have been 3,792, when accounting for the decline in overall incarcerated population. This means 2020 saw 2,308 excess deaths largely brought about by COVID and its tertiary effects, including the lack of capacity for other urgent health problems due to overwhelming cases of the virus. In other words, activists' fears came true. As COVID spread throughout the county at the beginning of the pandemic, there was no real mitigation efforts by states and federal prison authorities, other than locking prisoners in their cells all day, which did little to stop the spread of COVID, and also had tremendous negative health effects on incarcerated people, compounding the trauma of serving time during a pandemic. Even today, many prisons are being ripped apart by Omicron, the vast bulk unable to get essential booster shots. More than 40 states have no plans to provide boosters for the incarcerated. The BJS data doesn't include local jails, immigration detention centers, youth prisons, or involuntary commitment, so the toll is likely much higher. It's safe to assume that if the government published statistics showing a 61% increase in carjackings, this would solicit wall-to-wall coverage in the United States. If there was an uptick of 61% in assaults, we'd have blue ribbon commissions, non-stop debates on cable, and demagoguing politicians calling for longer and tougher sentences. If there were a 61% increase in shoplifting, we wouldn't stop hearing about it. Indeed, over 300 outlets ran reports on a single shoplifting incident in July 2021. That's 300 reports about a single shoplifting incident compared to one, showing an unprecedented rise in needless deaths in America's already cruel and overpacked prisons. The lives our media chooses to care about, or rather, in the case of many outlets, the retail products it chooses to care about, says everything about our media priorities. And in this case, it shows that, broadly speaking, those anonymously and unceremoniously wasting away in our prisons are expendable, and their deaths, not particularly newsworthy. Once you enter the prison system, your humanity is gone. That is the fundamental goal of the prison system, is to dehumanize people, is to create commodities. That you as a human being are merely a commodity. It's just made explicit in the prison system. And the media apparatus is not going to confront what's going on in the prison systems, because that would mean confronting the slave culture that exists in America. That the prisons are simply an extension of the plantation system. Like, it is not different. That they found a loophole in their constitution which allows them to treat incarcerated prisoners as slaves. And so they have done everything they can to create a culture to incentivize incarceration in order to create slaves. It's very straightforward. Like, it's very, very straightforward. And the reason I wanted to read this report is simply to highlight, like, the importance of a channel such as this. So I guess it's a bit self-effacing, or effacing, self-inflating. Our news media has abandoned us. That if it's talking about someone, yeah, shoplifting is huge news. Fox audiences eat that slop up, yeah. because you can catch them in this idea of dehumanizing people, right? And that someone is a criminal, right? Like they get caught in this title of being a criminal. And it's like, for me, like shoplifting, I'm just like, shoplifting is like the least important thing ever. Like, you take a look at how much waste is happening in the system, right? Take a look at how much waste is happening in the system. And then, like, as soon as you actually comprehend and actually have it in your brain how much waste exists in the system, shoplifting becomes almost irrelevant. Like, really, oh, so they took the loaf of bread before it ended up in the dump. What's the problem? Like, for real. Like, I don't actually get the issue. Like, what's the difficulty here? And most of the time it's like, if I was a judge and they were like, yeah, he stole $500 worth of stuff and it's a shoplifting kind of thing, I would be like, okay, cool. 10 days of community service. Like, that's where I would be. Like, you know, I wouldn't consider that a big problem. Like, the scale and scope of the waste that exists within the American system outweighs in enormous ways the amount of shoplifting. Like, who gives a fuck at all? Like, take a look at wage theft, for God's sakes. Like, start asking yourself, why is it that people feel the need to shoplift, right? And like, you're gonna find, like, people are shoplifting essential shit. People are it's that classic kind of ethical question that we all talked about in school, which is like, well, is it okay for someone to break the law if they need food to feed their family? And it's like, yes, any system that is depriving people of food and shelter is not a system that needs to be taken seriously. I mean, it needs to be taken seriously in regards to what it can do to you, but you don't need to worry about its laws or its rules, right? It doesn't worry about you, right? Like, it's depriving food and shelter from you so that you can, so that you have to force yourself to enslave yourself to a system dominated by billionaires. Like, that's the structure of the system. And such a system, like, when you watch Robin Hood, like, do you find yourself cheering for the Sheriff of Nottingham? Do you find yourself cheering for or for Prince John? Right? Like, if you do, maybe you should probably, like, take a look at the mirror, right? Like, you should actually, like, think about things. Like, because the rest of us see Robin Hood as a hero, right? And Robin Hood was literally robbing people. Like, what do you think the story was about? Like, this is why they can't really tell a good Robin hero story, by the way. Like, they tried to tell a Robin Hood story recently, and it was called Hood. And they tried to, what they tried to do is they tried to keep the setting in the ancient times, so they tried to modernize it. So they tried to make, like, archery cool, and they tried to, like, they had, like, Jamie Foxx, and, like, it didn't work. Just, it didn't really pan out. But, like, if you set Robin Hood in today's modern world, like, he would slide in right away. Like, right away. Like, and people would love him. Like, yeah, he steals from rich cocksuckers and he gives it to the poor. Like, why do we have a system where such a figure needs to exist at all? Why do we have that figure at all? Right? That in a proper society that actually cared about its poor and actually cared about its homeless, right? A figure like Robin Hood would not exist, right? Because you wouldn't need to rob from the rich to give to the poor, because the poor would be, like, fine, right? Yeah, Biden's crime law in 1994 created a level of incarceration never seen before. A large amount of these prisoners are there for drug offenses. It helps to have a prison population of nonviolent offenders. Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. And also, like, drug offenses is easy, right? You literally can just have a bag on you and just plant it, right? Which we know the cops do, right? Like, so you can just grab anyone you like and say, hey, I found this on them. Right? Like, literally, you can just grab anyone you like and just be like, got him. Right? So, of course, they're doing it. And everyone's incentivized to do this. Like, the cops have quotas to meet. The judges are bribed by the prison industrial complex in order to funnel people in. We know this because we keep catching them. right? It's technically a crime to do it. Although the punishment is usually just like, you can't be a judge anymore. Do I have to give away any of my money? No. Okay. Like, so like the punishment for getting caught is that you don't get to do the grift anymore. So you just take your money and run, basically. Like, the prisons themselves are completely invested in this. The prosecutors, everybody's invested in the idea that we just get as many prisoners into these prison cells as we possibly can. So there's like no, and because the entire system has been completely corrupted in this manner, like there's no walking it back, right? Yeah, no, they have performance standards. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Home Depot is going to start activating power tools by Bluetooth at the register to prevent theft. Yeah, next $5 per month subscription. Yep. No, you're right though. Like it's going to get that kind of ludicrous. It's going to get really dumb. Like there's going to be all kinds of just absolutely bullshit and ridiculous things that happen as the society continues its decline, right? Like as the society continues to polarize, and like it has to. Like it just by definition it has to. There's no there's literally no evidence to show that it's going to do anything but continue polarizing in the way that it is, right? And it's just something's got to give, something's going to break, right? And you're seeing it with these truckers, for example, right? Like there's a group of people who are like, something's got to give, something's got to break, right? They don't necessarily know what to do, and what they do might not be very effective. We'll see, of course, but like these should be the canaries in the coal mines for the political class, right? I would be very worried if I was Justin Trudeau. I'd be very worried that there are these like guys in trucks coming to the parliament. Like I'd be very concerned about that. Like it's not something to dismiss, right? Like these guys can start causing real problems and start doing real shit. And like if you continue with the project of abandonment, which that's what it is, it's the project of abandonment, well, don't be too fucking blown away when people start to fight back, right? Or simply blow up, right? Like, if you want to understand this process, just take a look at the film Joker, right? Like, an abandoned person will turn against the society that abandons him. Like, it's called radicalization, right? And the system itself radicalizes people. The system itself is designed to radicalize people. And it's going to happen like all at once, right? As the wages stop paying the rent and people are just met with the realities of what the system is going to say to them, right? When the system starts to throw people into the streets in huge numbers and people are just told to get a better job, right? That's going to be the end of it. And it's right on the horizon. Like you got to be kind of a dullard to not see it. And I mean, for God's sake, 19% of recent home buyers own multiple properties. So in terms of recent homeowners, 1 out of every 5th house is bought by someone who already has a house. Can't imagine what's going on in the housing market, guys. Like it's really, 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 oh man, it's such a complicated issue. A new survey suggests nearly 1 in 5 home buyers during the pandemic are multi-property owners, with the remaining number evenly split between first-time home buyers and those upgrading or downsizing to a new home. So, first-time home buyers is what we actually care about, right? Like, first-time home buyers is what we actually care about. These are the people who are getting completely left into the lurch. So, of the new houses that are being bought, right, of the recent home buys, 40% are first-time home buyers, right? While the remaining 40% are just people who are doing lateral moves. That's according to the latest Rates.ca and BNN Bloomberg survey, which was conducted online from January 7th to the 9th among 1,547 respondents, and which sought to understand who has been buying homes during the pandemic and how they're funding their down payments. 9% of those respondents said they purchased a home in the last 18 months. The bulk of the survey focused on those individuals and found that 40% of them said that they were first-time home buyers and that the property they were purchasing is their primary residence. Those buyers were overwhelmingly between the ages of 18 to 34%, 65%, while 11% were between the ages of 35 to 54. Interestingly, 24% were over the age of 55. Another 39% said they already owned one property and were purchasing another. So hold on. Another 39% said they already, so burying the lead, classic, right? 19% of recent home owners own multiple properties, right? There's the headline. Well, down here you're saying another 39% said they already owned one property and were purchasing another. So, like, which is it here? Finally, 19% said they owned multiple properties, while 2% said they preferred not to answer. So here we have another 39% said they already owned one property and were purchasing another one. So literally 60% of the market, 58% of the market of recent home buyers is exactly as I keep saying that it is. It's people who already have properties using their wealth to buy more properties. That instead of everyone having a home, instead of everyone having access to a home, you have a small group of speculators and investors who are buying up the market. And you have smaller players, right, who are trying to get into that market. But it's a big fucking game of Monopoly, is what it is. And it is only a matter of time until the system deviates in such a direction that all of this is owned by one or two or three people. Like, it is the inevitability of all of this. And the outcomes are going to be nasty, are going to be absolutely nasty for us. The survey asked home buyers how they funded the down payment for their purchase. Nearly 1 in 5 first-time home buyers said they were using gifted money from a family member. So 20% of them are just literally like, my daddy gave me money, right? The most popular way to fund a down payment was from personal savings, with 47% of respondents doing so. Another 24% said they funded the purchase from the sale of another property, while 14% said they leveraged equity from an existing property. Now, and of course, anyway, I won't get into it. Affordability has been a major challenge for home buyers in Canada, especially during the pandemic. A survey from Royal LePage earlier this month found that the average price of Canadian homes increased by 17.1% to $779,000 in the fourth quarter of 2021 compared to the previous year. High home prices are not the only challenges that home buyers face. Rates.ca and BNN Bloomberg released a report in November that found that 29% of respondents who have or are planning to get a mortgage were unsure about how rising interest rates would impact their loans. The survey found that 71% of those who had a mortgage or were planning to get one were opting for fixed, while 18% were choosing viable, and on and on. Oh, here we go. The good news is that Bloomberg survey found that many Canadians put down large down payments, which leaves them in strong equity position. 42% of respondents said they put 20 to 30% down when buying their home, while 15% said they put down more than 41%. So, and that's the good news, right? That these people, the people who are buying in so heavily that they can never get out of it. That's really what it's coming down to. Like, these people are trapped. Hooray. But, like, for real, like 39% said they already owned one property, were purchasing another one. Finally, 19% they own multiple properties. So they've created a distinction between people who own one, who are buying their second property, and people who already have them. And they did that so that they could put the lowest number possible in the headline. And why did they do that? Because they know if the headline says 58% of properties are being bought by people who already own properties, that's not good, right? So you see how they're doing this. You see how they're manipulating it to protect the billionaire class, to protect the wealth holding class, to just ensure that no one actually digs any deeper into this and realize that the trouble is that we have fucking billionaires in the conversation. Like, for fuck's sakes. Like, what do we need to see here? Like, what do we need? Like, when is it going to get to the point where we finally, like, throw these guys off of us and get rid of them from the fucking conversation? Like, it's fucking brutal. So here's of the current federal party leaders, this is a poll from Polling Canada, whose vision for the country is closest to your personal views? Singh, 25%, Trudeau, 24%, O'Toole, 14%, Bernier, 9%, and Blanchet, 6%. What's most interesting about this poll? None, 15%. Unsure, 7%. So, the Conservative Party of Canada, right? The leaders of the opposition here in Canada, when asked whose vision for the country is closest to your personal views, score about the same amount as none. Like, really let that sink into you. Like, really, really let that sink into you. And when I see this poll, what I see is that there's 15% of the society that wants communism. Fairly straightforwardly, right? That Trudeau, Singh, O'Toole, Bernier, Blanchet, they don't represent us. They don't have the vision that's closest to my personal views. Like, well, that 15% isn't saying we're far right, we want to go further to the right. They have all the opportunity to do that with Bernier, right? Who's right there in the poll, 9%. So what's that 15% looking for? Right? Well, that 15%, if they wanted slightly more left liberalism, they could go to Singh, right? There he is. He's right there, right? And if they liked the status quo, well, there's Trudeau, right? So I take this as a good sign, as good news for us and for this movement, that there is energy for leftism to exist, for socialism and communism to exist here in Canada. It's just not actually part of the political system. And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. Like, the communists and the socialists are actively attacked and actively chased out of the system, right? And for a figure to actually come and interact with the system will require, at this point, an enormous amount of good fortune. Like, an enormous amount of good fortune, right? They're not going to get spread around by the media. They're not going to get talked about. They're going to be ignored. They're going to be omitted from the conversation. And finally, like, there are physical acts that can be done against such figures, right? Like, the Communist Party of Canada during the 80s and 90s got infected by a group of people who actively worked to destroy the party from within, right? Like, literally stealing finances from the party, doing everything it could to foment a schism. And it took years and years for the party to figure it out and to get those people cleared out, right? This is the extent that the power structure is willing to go in order to destroy leftist movements. When you've got 15% of the population that's answering none. Well, who like, what do you think they're talking about here? What do you think this 15% is interested in? It's also very interesting to see that O'Toole is like at 14% while Singh is at 25%, and yet O'Toole is the leader of the opposition and Singh isn't. Like, that's interesting. How are you guys doing out there? I feel like the chat's quieter than usual. How many people I got here? Yeah, I got 10 viewers right now, yeah. I gotta tell you, I'm feeling rough. I'm feeling rough today. Feeling rough today. I think I might actually be a little sick, honestly. Hope it's not the COVIDs. It's not about truckers. It isn't about mandates. It isn't even about vaccines, really. The flu trucks convoy is about right-wing grifters, politicians taking advantage and organizing a number of people that feel they do not have their material needs met. And this is the tweet that he's sharing. I carpool now, can't afford the gas. I quit smoking, couldn't afford the smoke. I take overtime and work 3 jobs fishing and chartering, and I'm still very much lower class, making over $100,000 a year. Guy's a fucking tool bag, and I hope he fucking dies. Yes, he's a fucking tool, no different than the rest of the politicians. The problem is the system itself. We don't live in a democracy. The people that make life unaffordable own these politicians. Right? Like, this looks like leftist talk. This doesn't look like far-right stuff. Right? This, to me, looks like this is something communists would say. I've been talking about this the whole time, right? Like, when I listen to the PPC, right, I feel like I'm listening to communists. It's just that when they start getting into prescriptions, it's like incoherent nonsense, right? Capitalism invented Biscroft. That's enough to judge it as worthless. What the heck is Biscroft? I gotta know, dude. I gotta know. Biscoff. Oh. Monstrous. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. These cookies, whoever these cookies were made for are monsters. Right? Like, capitalism is facilitating this kind of gross, disgusting bullshit. If I wanted to eat a piece of cardboard, I'd just eat the piece of fucking cardboard. Right? Sprinkle a little sugar on it, maybe. Have the disgusting biscuit. You know, man, I've never eaten one of these. I know exactly what would happen if I actually ate one of these. Is that I would put it in my mouth and I'd be like, oh yeah, okay. Oh, I get it. Yeah. And even maybe I would even be like, I don't think I care for these. And then I would eat the entire bag. For sure. This has all of the look of like something that you would just sort of like mindlessly put into your mouth over and over again and just forget that you were eating. Yeah. This is from Stephen Panwasi. Me. Why is no one talking about Canada training neo-Nazis? Liberals. The truckers are racists. One was carrying a Confederate flag. Me. The neo-Nazi supporting government is offended by a flag? Liberals. Racist truckers? You don't get it. Me. Liberals. Racists. Trucks. But this is pointing something really interesting out, which is that Trudeau has voiced very publicly that he considers this trucking movement to be a far-right fringe movement, right? Like, that's what he's called it publicly. But why should that offend him at all? He's funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine, right? So isn't it just his own people talking to him, right? Like, who are the people he's giving money to? He's giving them to neo-Nazi groups. Right? So, are we surprised? Like, why don't you help them then? Right? If you're willing to give money to these far-right neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, like, what's holding you up over here, chap? Like, what's the problem? And then, of course, from Anti-Hate, which I've reported on before, the Freedom Convoy is nothing but a vehicle for the far right. They say it's about truckers and have raised over $6 million on GoFundMe. But if you look at its organizers and promoters, you'll find Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, and incitements to violence. A crowd-funded convoy, ostensibly fighting against a mandate for truckers, has raised over $6 million. Its 2 GoFundMe organizers are previously known figures in Canada's far-right ecosystem and have publicly made Islamophobic comments. Its loudest promoter, Pat King, is a racist who has tried to incite his audience to violence more times than you can count. He's so bad for their public image that other organizers have even tried to put some distance between them. Some convoy supporters, like the Diagolan network, are even saying that they want this to be Canada's very own January 6th, referring to the attempted insurrection in Washington, D.C. that led to multiple deaths and widespread arrests. Diagolan is an accelerationist movement, which means they believe a revolution is inevitable and necessary to collapse the current system. It's also rife with neo-Nazis. Since the start of the pandemic, COVID conspiracies have been bringing various fringe and far-right elements together. The close connections between the People's Party of Canada, the young white supremacists of Canada First, and the Diagolan Network is one example. This convoy is another. The mainstream media has been very slow to report on far-right connections, just like they were in 2019 when the far-right had their much smaller United We Roll convoy. Most have given them uncritical coverage, using their language and calling it a freedom convoy. Now arriving from different corners of Canada, the fleet of semi-trucks, half-ton pickups, SUVs, and more than a few sedans is on its way to Parliament Hill. Many of their supporters swear this isn't about the far right, or even, bizarrely, that they aren't anti-vaccine. Most of them probably believe it, too. But the organizers behind the convoy, and where it emerged from, paint a very different picture. The convoy draws apt comparisons to a similar, albeit less funded, protest movement held in 2019, the United We Roll convoy. Organized primarily by associates of the Canadian Yellow Vest movement, UWR painted a narrative of disenfranchised oil and gas workers riding their rigs across country to force a detached and distant Ottawa to listen. Yellow Vests Canada was largely founded by individuals already associated with Canada's far right, which at the time was primarily united by anti-Muslim racism and Islamophobia. Excited by the protests held by France's Mouvement de Gilets Jaunes, they occupied the signature uniform name and adopted new grievances that would get them a much larger audience. They said they were for oil and gas, and that they represented the Western alienation from a distant, liberal Ottawa. But the Facebook groups were also full of hundreds of examples of explicit anti-Muslim racism and calls for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's arrest and execution, a theme that remains present among COVID conspiracy demonstrations. By the time United We Roll arrived in Ottawa, media had started to catch on. Neo-Nazi Faith Goldie spoke on the second stage. The anti-Muslim hate group Northern Guard were spotted in attendance. Christopher Hayes, who was previously convicted of uttering threats against Justin Trudeau, and who has a history of membership in Islamophobic hate groups, was also there. Ultimately, UWR was a bust, with far few vehicles showing up than promised, and only a few hundred participants. Demoralized, the Yellow Vests Canada movement started to die out, although some holdouts kept smaller demonstrations going for months. The lead-up to the 2022 Freedom Convoy is extremely similar to the lead-up to UWR, and it shares many of the same organizers and participants. They're even reusing UWR promotional materials. Except this time they have the weight of the COVID conspiracy movement behind them and $6 million. Let's dive into this new convoy's most public figures. The money collectors. Tamara Lich. Oh, that's a great name to have. Tamara Lich. For those of you who don't know, a lich is a wizard who becomes undead because of the power. Tamara Lich and BJ Deichter, neither of whom are truck drivers, are currently listed as the organizers of the GoFundMe page. Deichter was a late addition, only added this week. Both have interesting histories when it comes to political organizing. Lich, born in Saskatchewan, now hails from Medicine Hat, Alberta, where she served as an organizer for Yellow Vests Canada, a regional coordinator for the separatist Western Exit or Wexit movement in Alberta, and now as the secretary for the Maverick Party, another separatist movement and fringe political party. Attending and boosting Yellow Vest events starting in 2018, Lich's social media posts from the time show her in one moment calling out some hateful rhetoric within the movement, while also posting Islamophobic articles of her own, like conspiracies about the Muslim Brotherhood operating in Canada. She shared posts from the Clarion Project, an organization that advances anti-Muslim content through its web-based and video production platforms, as well as deeply conspiratorial and, once again, anti-Islamic podcast, The Quiggin Report, hosted by dubious security expert Tom Quiggin. Litch heavily promoted Quiggin's 2019 Alberta tour, saying it was an absolute honor to have hosted him during the stay in Medicine Hat. The Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario is now just like the Liberal Party or the NDP. They are suffering from a political entryism, Quiggin said in an episode criticizing Member of Provincial Parliament Khalid Rashid, a Muslim man. They have members in their party who are there to advance the cause of a foreign ideology. So either Progressive Conservative Party takes a very hard look at itself now, or faces a future where extremism becomes normalized within the party. Litch shared the episode with the comment, "Canadians, are you paying attention yet? We do not want the Muslim Brotherhood in Canada." Scrutiny of the convoy has increased, which, according to the Canadian press, briefly resulted in the crowdsourcing website freezing donations. Shortly thereafter, one-time Conservative Party of Canada candidate, People's Party of Canada booster, and co-founder of the podcast network, Possibly Correct, Benjamin B.J. Deichter appears as a co-organizer on the GoFundMe page. Deichter's website shares the Quiggin Report, and Deichter himself shares similar Islamophobic sentiments in public. In 2019, he claimed that Islamist entryism is rotting away at our society like syphilis. The Conservative Party of Canada is suffering from the stench of cultural relativism and political Islam, he said during the first PPC conference held in Gatineau, Quebec. It is suffering from the stench of extremism that same way in third world countries suffer from extremist groups, separatist groups, communist guerrilla factions, paramilitaries, organized crime, and more. Pat King is so toxic, he's sort of disavowed. Patrick King, another former Yellow Vester, one-time major figure in the Wexit movement, as well as United We Roll, is listed as the contact to join the Alberta North portion of the convoy. A conspiracy theorist and streamer, King has made headlines when he supports and confronts members of an anti-racist rally in Red Deer, Alberta. Several instances of violence occurred during this event, including against an individual who attempted to serve King with a restraining order. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are planning a huge rally to disrupt our community, he said at the time. Help support us to help drive out these left-wing anarchists that are trying to disrupt communities and trying to threaten people. He also drew attention after a wild misinterpretation of court documents led him claiming he forced Alberta to abandon its public health lockdowns. In the past, King has gone on record about his feelings about the Anglo-Saxon replacement that plans to flood Canada with refugees and subvert the education system, a thin rebranding of the Great Replacement theory touted by ethno-nationalists. At other points, King has expressed overtly racist and anti-Semitic statements. In a 2019 stream about the then upcoming federal election, King complained that he had to leave the movement due to their lack of success. The election won't matter unless you want to change your national language to Chinese or Mandarin or Hebrew, and going on to compare Chinese names to the sound of change falling down the stairs. He publicly distorted established facts about the Holocaust, a form of Holocaust denial, saying, "I do know that the Holocaust was reduced to 1.5 million and not the 6 million it was said to be." He then invoked the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that the Jewish people are secretly in control of world governance, media, and finances. The questions have been asked several times to the ADL and the Jewish government communities. We have Jewish world bankers who are dictating our government policies and controlling our politicians. The extremists are coming. Over the last week, King has made numerous live streams to social media, frequently saying he is conducting his own crowdfunding for the trip and is not benefiting from the GoFundMe. King's involvement led to some initial tension among those interested in supporting the convoy, but who were not enthused about what they perceived as a potentially enriching King through the larger fundraiser. Among this group was Diagolan concept creator and far-right streamer Jeremy Raging Dissent McKenzie. Banned from several platforms, Mackenzie once told his audience to read a piece of neo-Nazi fiction called Day of the Rope. Mackenzie defends his endorsement by saying it's about murdering pedophiles. In the book, all these pedophiles just so happen to be Jewish. The title of the book is taken straight from a chapter title in the infamous neo-Nazi novel The Turner Diaries, in which race traitors, like people in interracial relationships, politicians and journalists, are strung up on the streets. The novel is regularly found on mass murderers' desks or bookshelves. Gun or rope is Mackenzie's slogan. While some participants swear it's a peaceful convoy, Mackenzie's anti-Semitic friend and fellow Diagolan streamer Derek Harrison is wishing for the opposite. "I would like to see our own January 6th event," he says in a live stream. "See some of those truckers plow right through that 16-foot wall." Since massive public attention has thrust the convoy into the spotlight, Mackenzie and many of his followers now plan to attend the Ottawa protest. However, Mackenzie has previously exited an organizing group on the chat app Telegram when he saw Pat King was involved. Mackenzie is a retired combat veteran with the Canadian Armed Forces, and his animosity towards Pat King may be about stolen valor. King still faces accusations that he presented himself as a former military member, before later releasing a video where he appears to apologize for this claim. The controversies around King resulted in a statement being released into the fundraising page saying, "King is not and never has been affiliated with our movement, nor has he been part of our great team of volunteers." This update appears to have since been deleted, and King claimed later in a video that the statement was a public relations move because he was being attacked online. In a previous live stream, King also scrolled through a private Facebook chat titled Convoy 2022, and appears to contain Litch, Canada Unity President James Botter, and others discussing disorganizational details about the convoy. King remains listed on a contact as on the Unity Canada website. Struggling. Truck driver associations condemn the convoy. Initially, the issue addressed by the convoy was narrowly focused on the vaccine mandates for truck drivers who would be required to cross the US-Canada border as part of their work. We talked to our members, and they said we encourage our drivers not to participate. But I feel like they just want to be heard, and this is the way they've been doing it for years. Jean-Marc Picard, executive director for the Atlantic Provinces Trucking Association, told CTV News during an interview. I can't get by this. The guy's name is Jean-Marc Picard. So he's like the brother of Jean-Luc Picard. Jean-Luc and Jean-Marc. Wow. The Picard's getting around. Likewise, the Canadian Trucking Alliance issued a statement saying it does not support and strongly disapproves of any protests on public roadways, highways, and bridges. The CTA's president also followed up more recently in a joint statement with the Ministers of Labour and Transport. The Government of Canada and the Canadian Trucking Alliance both agree that vaccination, used in combination with preventative public health measures, is the most effective tool to reduce the risk of COVID-19 for Canadians and to protect public health, it reads. The CTA told the CBC that the mandate could impact 12,000 to 16,000 Canadian commercial drivers, around 10 to 15% of the industry's cross-border drivers. Tamara Litch and Benjamin B.J. Deitcher did not respond to requests for comment. I like anti-hate. I like antihate.ca because they do a really good job on digging deep, on doing the type of journalism that you would expect larger organizations to actually do. Hey, Victini, how you doing, bud? Haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you, bud. Yeah. No mentions of xenophobia. Yeah, of course. Can't do that. People keep saying the pendulum swings, but I don't see it slowing down on supporting corporations and capitalists. Yeah. ABCs of capitalism. Anything but class. Exactly, bud. Exactly. And you really see it more and more. The more you really realize, They're trying everything they can to make sure that there's never an actual class discussion, that it's never actually framed as the ownership class versus the working class, which is what it is. I've spent the past week engrossed in this movement. It's a racist parade. Yeah, for sure, Tom. Like, for sure. I haven't done big, deep dives because I've seen enough, right? I saw enough. But I mean, an anti-hate just did a real good report here. There are 260,000 Canadian truckers and 120,000 cross-border truckers in Canada. Guess how many truckers crossed the border yesterday? 120,000. It's literally Yellow Vest 2.0 and not the international. These are all the Pegida folks. I don't know if I understand your comments, Tom. Sorry. The MTO should just stop them all. Check their CVOR logbooks and brakes. Maybe dip their fuel tanks to make sure they're paying their tax on diesel fuel. Well, my question is very simply, like my question is very, very simply, what's in these trucks? Like, what's in these trucks? You're telling me that all these trucks are going to show up and no one is going to be bringing a bunch of, like, you can bring some pretty heavy-duty material, dude. Like, you can bring some heavy-duty shit. Yeah, penalties for dyed fuel are super high, yeah. You just get your information from communist subreddits. Some boomer who gets his information from Joe Rogan and H3 Podcast and BitChute. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, you got to challenge your worldview. You got to have your worldview challenged, right? Like, you got to let people challenge your worldview. You got to listen and actually allow them to challenge it. And, like, it is getting to the point now where, like, the right doesn't really have much to say anymore, right? They're not, and it is getting to the point where the right is no longer interested in challenging, because they're starting to understand that they're out to lunch, right? They're starting to understand, like, the people who are banning mouse in Tennessee, the people who are getting rid of CRT and all this kind of stuff, they don't believe the shit they say. There's no fucking way they do. Like, they know that what they're doing is being done to get rid of these, to get rid of black people from the conversation. They understand that. Like, it's very straightforward. They just also know they need to put on a public face. Yeah, I choose Neil Young. Yeah, exactly. There are 14 tractor trailers, 104 tractors, 600 passenger vehicles. That's very specific information, dude. Like, it's gonna be interesting. Oh yeah, I love this. 2040s liberals. $7.50 is an adequate minimum wage today. You can always quit and go join Nestle Corp, securing water in the Republic of Texas. A Bezos University Prime membership is free if you live and work in an Amazon town. Rogan News Network isn't biased. He says all the slurs. We'll get it fixed when all the Gen Xers die. My boss won't replace my outdoor respirator. How am I supposed to get work done now? My parents were killed in the Coca-Cola wars. That's why I only drink Pepsi. You just need more empowering murals between the urinal trough and the food trough. Chicago is underwater and my boss is making me go to work again. At least we got our crypto stimulus from VP Musk this year. What's a union? Lib's gonna lib. That left Kingston this morning. Eesh. Yeah, that's a good amount. That's healthy. That's a healthy amount. Yeah, we're gonna see. It's gonna be a cluster no matter how it goes. Like, even if all they do is show up and make a stink and leave, right? Like, that's gonna be kind of a big stink. But if there are people within their ranks that are looking for this to turn into like a January 6th, like, these people are going to be sharply disappointed, right? Like, here's why. In the United States, it really did look like there was insider collusion, right? That the police forces and the security forces seemed to be working with the protesters in many cases. That's just not happening here in Canada, right? Like, it really isn't. We still have, like, a rule of law to a degree, right? There still is, like, can you imagine if these guys started to storm the parliament? Like, this is why I do not advocate a storming of the parliament. I do not advocate. I advocate a surrounding of the halls of power, and a public redrawing of the Constitution. That's what I advocate for. Like, interact with the electoral system as best you can, but it's not serious in my view. Like, the system is overwhelmed by capital. That's the problem with it, and we can't really recover. And so, but I worry that these guys are going to go down there, and they're going to storm this place, right? And there's a good reason, by the way, why I say that this is a bad idea, right? Like, I have people who have come in here and who have said that we should do a violent revolution, right? That's what we should be focusing on, is a violent revolution. A direct overthrow through storming of the halls of power and all of this. And they cite, like, the October Revolution, right? Mao, all of this. But if we were to do that, like, and let's say we did that and we're successful, right? Like, let's just live in fantasy land and say that we managed to get enough people who are willing to arm themselves and actually storm the Capitol, and we were successful. It would immediately destroy the country. It would instantly destroy the country. Because in the October Revolution, the Russian people were more or less unified. That they understood that there was a class battle going on, and that it was between the workers and the owners. And so when the revolution occurred, it very much was workers' organizations unified all together, overthrowing the ownership class. No such thing exists here in North America, right? There is no class consciousness. We are not unified along class lines. We certainly are not unified to the degree where some kind of violent revolution would be successful, right? And so, in many ways, it's putting the cart before the horse, right? Like, what we should be doing is organizing with one another, building class consciousness, and absolutely be talking about surrounding the halls of power, right? Like, absolutely we should be talking about that, because that should be the objective of this movement. But unless we can actually take everyone along with us, right? Unless we actually do have, like, a unified class conscious society, we're not going anywhere. And a violent coup of the halls of power would just destroy the society completely, even if it was successful, right? Like, the divisions that exist in our society and in our culture are not going to be, are not going to go away suddenly. And in many ways, I think it's just like a young man's way of looking at the situation and trying to find a shortcut. And it's just not going to work. Like, it's just not going to work. And I'll be honest, man, there is definitely a little part of me that's like, boy, I hope they try. Like, I hope they try. Like, I can't imagine a more effective way to completely discredit your movement and ensure, like, military surveillance, ensure the suppression of your movement. Like, can you imagine if they, like, if even one of these guys, right? If even one of these guys drove their truck into into the parliament, can you imagine what it would be? Victini, anti-war protest, Toronto, U.S. consulate, tomorrow, noon. Unfortunately, I'm in Capitalism. Can't do anything. Sorry, Embassy, University Avenue. So it's not the consulate, it's the Embassy, University Avenue. Tomorrow at noon, if anybody can make it. I won't be able to, unfortunately, Victini. I'm still caught within the thralls of capitalism. Capitalism wraps its hands around me. And will never let me go. I hope that I can get out of this fucking cafe job. It would be so nice if this audiobook thing worked out and I actually started making money doing that. That would be so killer. I would be so over the moon by that. Just like if my life became doing this and reading other people's novels, I'd be pretty okay with that. That sounds pretty good to me. I just need days off, man. Like, and everybody I'm talking to, it's the same story. Like, nobody has any time off. Nobody has any days off. Nobody's actually getting to, like, just chill out and relax, right? Like, everybody's working their ass off. And it just shouldn't be this way. It's too difficult. It's too stupid. Like, and it's not even that it's difficult. Like, if it was difficult, but we were all doing something that mattered and that was meaningful and that would actually lay the groundwork for a better society, then it would be great. But that's not what's happening. We're all working our ass off for fuck all. Like, we're not building anything. We're not doing anything. And in fact, everything we're doing is going to destroy us. My daughter is quitting Walmart, starting DoorDash. She hates the job pressure. She's a freshman in college, super proud. And like, but this is so fucking stupid. Like, this is the stupidity I'm talking about. Like, kids that are in college should be in college. They should be studying the things that they are studying. They should be focusing on those studies. Like, do you really, really want the guy that's about to do your heart surgery to have been also doing DoorDash when he was learning how to do that? Like, I don't, right? Like, and nor do I think that a person should have to do that. Like, for fuck's sake, like we're creating a society of exhausted people who are just, like, not going to be able to actually get anything fucking done. Yeah, we made a society where everyone has to work 24/7 just to scrape by. We did it. Hooray, and that's called productivity. And we know that it's good because the stonks line goes up, right? Hey guys, the stonks line went up. That means everything's good. I saw a sus number of gas cans on the roof of a creepy white van in Ottawa. Ugh. Creepy. Creepy white vans. Creepy white vans are the creepiest. So, yet another poll here in Ontario, right? This is from Council. Ford on track to win slim majority. Horwath ahead of Del Duca with 17 weeks to election day. Do they have, like, a nice little graph? Yeah, Doug Ford's Ontario PC's strong base eyeing expansion. What do we got? Horwath's biggest opportunity to grow, like Ford's, is in the Peel region. Come on, are you not? Do they give me the actual, just straight up the head-to-head? That's all I really care about. Like, I don't want to dig too much deeper. I'm actually, like, remarkably tired today, man. Like, I'm remarkably tired. When I'm done this stream, I might just go straight to bed. Technically, she doesn't have to work, but she has to pay for gas and dates with her boyfriend and Legos. Weird Lego fixation. Yeah, good for her. That's not a bad fixation to have, honestly. People who have the patience to put Legos together. If an election were held today, poll respondents would vote 34.9% for Doug Ford's Ontario PCs, 30.5% for Andrea Horwath's Ontario NDP, and 24.2% for Stephen Del Duca's Ontario Liberal Party. 4% for Mike Schreiner's Ontario Green Party, and 6% for other parties. If I didn't have kids, I would move into a box truck. Yeah. Hard to argue with that. It'd be really cool if, like, we could get, like, like an RV and get it powered by solar energy. Like, get solar panels on it so it's powered by solar energy and just drive around the country like that, right? Like, your fuel is the sun, which is powered by solar power, right? And you could just, like, travel around and be like a neo-vagrant, be like a new school vagrant type, where you're just, like, traveling around the country doing good. Like, you could become like a Western gunslinger, right? You could, like, go into town and be like, what's your problem? Right? Oh, thank you, grinning guys. You're a superhero. You're welcome, ma'am. Tip the hat. Off you go. And of course, Aaron O'Toole plans to meet with truckers protesting vaccine mandates in Ottawa. Conservative leader also condemns participants pushing for division and hatred. I'm a touch on the fence about this. Like, I think politicians should meet with groups like this. It is somewhat telling that it's O'Toole doing it, not Trudeau. Right? Like, it's somewhat telling that this is the case. There are other groups using the plight of truckers to bring division, hatred, and we need to call that out and stamp it out, O'Toole said, later repeating a call for Canadian politicians to lower the temperature around the protest.
The convoy itself is becoming a symbol of the fatigue and the division we're seeing in this country. So tomorrow I will be meeting with truckers to hear their concerns, to talk about the proposals I brought 3 weeks ago to try and make sure we can keep grocery store shelves full, keep people working and work together. And I would ask Canadians that are frustrated by the convoy or frustrated by people that may not yet be vaccinated. Let's work together as a country. Let's not give up on anyone. Let's come together like we did in the first wave of this pandemic, with compassion, with the ability to overcome the frustrations we all feel. We have been, as a caucus, including Melissa Lantsman, our shadow minister, and many of our MPs have been speaking with individual truckers, with organizations, with hauling companies. We're in the process now of firming those up. What I've been trying to do over the last few days is try and make sure that I can speak to representative truckers from each part of the country that are here. As I've said, I think everyone deserves to have their voice heard. This needs to be a peaceful protest, but at a time where a lot of people feel that they're being shut out of discussions here in Ottawa, we have to make sure that those voices can be heard in a way that's effective and safe.
We should keep him to it, right? Would he say that if this was a group of communists? Would he say that if this was a group of communists? Do you think? Like if it wasn't like this far right group, right? Why aren't people respecting the lunatic fringe? The left is so intolerant. Yeah, like, well, look, if all that happens is that these trucks go to Ottawa, make a big stink, make a lot of noise, even if they decide to park and occupy, right? Even if they decide to park and occupy and try that strategy, right? Then I'm actually fine with it. Like, straight up. Like, I definitely disagree with their viewpoint. Like, I definitely see the racism angle and all of this kind of stuff. But if they're willing to man, it could really blow up, eh? Like, it could totally blow up. Oh, what's Mock got? Last head deputy minister of the Stasi, Werner Grobman, died. Fuck yeah. Get out of here. Fucking ministers of the Stasi. Goddamn bastards. I'm looking forward to Kissinger. That's who I'm looking forward to. How old is fucking Henry Kissinger? Like, how old? Come on. How old is Henry Kissinger? Yeah, this dude's still kicking around, man. Like, this is one of the great demons of American politics, Henry Kissinger, right? Like, an absolute barbarous psychopath, if you ask me, who just has gone around advising some of the most brutal actions that that America has ever done. Right? When this guy dies, the world will be better for it. And it's our job to dismantle his legacy. The idea that this guy has like institutions or is taken seriously as a speaker when all he's ever done is destroy. That's all he's ever done. All he's ever done is consume and destroy. Like, fuck's sake, Henry Kissinger. Oh, yes, a German-born American politician. Yeah, Yeah, prominent prominent role in United States foreign policy between 1969 and 1977. He pioneered the policy of détente, orchestrating open relations with China. Yeah, the shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East. What did this guy do? Yeah, the Kissinger has also been associated with such controversial policies as the U.S. involvement in the 1973 Chilean military coup, a green light to Argentina's military junta for their dirty war, U.S. support for Pakistan during the Bangladesh War, despite a genocide being perpetrated by Pakistan. After leaving government, he formed Kissinger Associates, an international geopolicy consulting firm. He's written over a dozen books on diplomatic history and international relations. So, here you go. You want the face of the fall of America. There you have it. Not entirely, of course. The Stasi was the same. God, my brain is so fucking ratchet right now, dude. The Stasi. Like, I know what the Stasi is. Yeah, the official name, Secret Police of the German Diplomatic Republic, East Germany. Yeah. The Stasi was one of the most hated and feared institutions of the East German communist government. There you go. I don't know enough about the Stasi, honestly, to comment on it. But about 1 out of every 63 East Germans collaborated with the Stasi. I don't know. It's it's so tough going back and actually talking about war, right? Like, war is so fucked up, and like this is why like we can't, like what we're doing in Ukraine, for example, like this constant thrum and this constant idea that we can just control these neo-Nazi groups that we're funding, even though every single time we fund some kind of far-right radical militia, it always blows up in our face. It's constantly over and over and over again blown up in our face. And yet here we are, yet again, pretending that we can fund neo-Nazi groups and then control the war that we unleash. Ugh. It's fucking ridiculous. It's fucking ridiculous. And so, yeah, I'm absolutely positive that, like, the Stasi was doing some really dark and shitty shit. Like, absolutely. It's got to be the case, right? Like, it's got to be the case. But, like, fucking war, man. Anyway. I have a technical question. Do you use OBS? I do. How do you set up a chat window, camera, and share screen thing? Okay, I'm just going to walk you through it, bud. Here's OBS. Right? And my solutions to all of these problems, like this is a window, right? This is just a YouTube streaming window. This is the YouTube streaming window right here. Right? OBS has it set up so that I can change and move this wherever I like, right? So, oh, my head, it's moving around your screen, right? And so that's done through OBS, right? And there's like Google and all this kind of stuff to show you how to get this all set up. The most tricky part of it was figuring out how to link OBS to YouTube. And that was very much like, you got the stream key. So you copy the stream key and you put it into, if you go to your settings, there's a place to put the stream key, and then you just put it there, and then it'll all, so when you hit the record button or the streaming button right there, it'll start streaming directly to YouTube. And there's another program that I want to start using because it gives you multi-streams. You can stream on like Twitch and YouTube simultaneously, but I don't know, I've just been too overwhelmed to actually commit. Like, I've got the program downloaded and I've done some stuff. And yeah, that's the long and short of it. Like, everything is done through OBS, right? Like, OBS Shares your screen. All right. Quite enough of that. Hope that helps, Victini. Hope that helps. Trying to help out the best I can. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. I'll put it that way, right? If I can figure it out, you for sure will figure it out. Like, as a guarantee. Like, it really was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. I watched so much Ukraine footage. Oh, bud. Yeah, it's easy to go down these, like, real... Like, I'm finding more and more that because of the live stream that I'm doing, and because of the fact that I also am working these other jobs, that I can't actually go down those rabbit holes anymore. I just simply don't have the time or the energy to do it. And and so I feel like I'm actually like one step behind in this conversation of Ukraine. Like, I feel like I'm a little bit behind. I feel like I should know more than I do. And it's because usually when I do get interested in that kind of stuff, I do like a deep dive to learn more about it. I just haven't been able to do it. But more and more, especially on the Ukraine issue, like, I feel like I should go deeper and I should learn more, should find out more about it. And Mocked, you're actually catching me out a little bit here today because of... And you're kind of reinforcing that suspicion that I've had, which is that I need to learn more and I need to know more about Ukraine. Especially, it looks like that's not going to clear up anytime soon. So I should find out more about it. But it's just like capitalism, man. Capitalism. It puts a boot on your face and it tells you can't go anywhere. And then there's also the aspect of like, just like my own mental health, like fuck, are you kidding me? Like, we got to do this trucker thing, the trucker convoy, like all this kind of stuff. And then on top of it, like, oh, by the way, don't forget about this fucking completely illegitimate war yet again. And I think the thing that's so fucking exhausting about it is that it's the same narrative, right? It's the same fucking narrative over and over and over again, right? Like, we're all telling the same story every single time. And we're told the same story every single time, right? Like, oh, there's some internal problem or some internal thing, so we've got to go in there and coup that government, and that's legitimate because we're white Westerners and we know better than the people who actually live there. And when we overthrow them, then we install our own government, and all the horrors that happen are because of the problems. And blah, 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 blah. NATO is American hegemony, yeah, of course, and Canada is the real offenders here. We've been more involved militarily instead of diplomatically more than any other country. Yeah, like, we're essentially just a part of America when it comes to the world stage. And other countries are right to view us as like a lapdog. We're completely a lapdog. We're the United States points at something and says fetch, and we go fetch. Seraphim, good to see you. I just watched an older video about the foreign policy issues with Ukraine by a professor who's surprisingly on it about the U.S. interventions. That's nice to hear. That's nice to hear. Do you know the name of the professor offhand? I'll search it up. I'll definitely search that shit up. Here. Yeah, speaking of, right? Countries do not redraw others' borders by force. A successful Russian invasion of Ukraine would rip that norm. Like, this is the Economist talking about it. Like, and this is the picture that they're using. Like, a war in Ukraine could have global consequences. Yeah, of course it could have global consequences. Like, it drives me crazy, man, that, like, no one talks about the 2014 coup. Like, no one talks about this. It's just completely ignored. And like I've said here, like, in terms of the, like, small workings and the small inner workings of what's going on in Ukraine, I'm not that well informed. But boy, howdy, do I know a coup when I see one. Right? And, like, we're all just supposed to ignore that. We're all just supposed to not pay any attention to the fact that there was a fucking coup in Ukraine. And that right-wing forces overthrew a left-wing democratically elected government. Right? And we're all supposed to treat Crimea as if it was like this enormous invasion by Moscow, instead of as a way to protect people who wanted to be protected from a fucking country that was undergoing a goddamn coup. Like, and the thing that gets me scared, honestly, and especially right now with these truckers going down, right? Like, if a coup can be done in a place like Ukraine, a coup can be done here, right? We could do that. Like, we're not special. We don't have magic powers. Thank you, Seraphim. Thank you. I'm going to look that guy up. That's the one. I actually feel like I recognize this name. Yes. Yes, I've listened to this guy before. This guy's great. No, this guy is great. Like, he actually is really, really astute. And what I find about him, anytime I listen to him, is that I don't always agree with him, but I don't think he's trying to lie. I think that's what's most important about him, is that I think he's not just trying to sell books. I think he is trying to figure out what's going on in the world, and he's trying to articulate it clearly and cleanly. So thanks for the name. Thanks for the name. I'm gonna spend some time with this, because maybe not tonight, but if they do talk about it, they'll never say anything other than peaceful protests happened. Exactly. Ironically, this is what the truckers are upset about. The coercion to get the shot is capitalist. Yeah, no more job. Bye-bye home. Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, I've said it over and over again on this channel, man. Like, the revolution will occur not because of some sort of ideological argument, not because of some kind of organized force comes together and says, we can do better than this. Like, the revolution is going to happen because people will be homeless. Like, the system will collapse and fail in significant and major ways. That, like, this is, and really dwell on this idea, right? The protests that you're seeing now are the protests that are happening before the mass homelessness occurs, right? Like, what do you think is going to happen in this society? What do you think is going to happen when people are being thrown into the streets, right? Like, the wage no longer pays the rent. Like, what do you think it's going to look like? It's going to be outrageous what happens. And this is, like, I feel like what's coming for the West is going to make, like, January 6th look like baby's first coup attempt. Like, we're going to see major militia groups. We are going to see major, major, major things occur. Yeah, I think you're right, Seraphim, but I don't mind that at all, right? Like, there was one fellow who was talking about, I forget his name offhand, but he was talking about, he went through the archived documents from the Communist Party, right? And he was arguing from the capitalist perspective. So he thought that the communists were bad guys while he went through it. But he was honest about what he saw, and he was honest about what he read, right? He wasn't trying to besmirch them outside of the ideological disagreements between capitalism and communism. He wasn't trying to treat Stalin like a monster, right? He just treated him like a communist who he believed that created an ideological difference between the two of them, which it does, right? One's a capitalist, one is a communist. Yet Ukraine is a relatively new democracy. That's true. That is why Putin feels like Kiev is threatening. A functioning democracy with strong ties to Russia threatens his power. Oh, here's a take I haven't actually heard, Victini. So what you're saying is that Putin does feel like Ukraine is a threat. It doesn't really have a functioning democracy, right? Like, it is, like, I mean, the West could the actual functioning government, like the actual democratic government that was actually elected by the people of Ukraine was actually pro-Moscow, right? That it refused to sign documents in order to side with NATO, which is why they couped the government, right? Like, like in this particular case, I'm very sympathetic to Ukraine's to Putin's position, right? Like if it was up to Putin, I think that he would want to just peacefully trade with Ukraine and let there be peace on his border, right? He doesn't want this like tension to exist. Why would he want that? Right? And if the elected leader of Ukraine was like, yeah, Moscow, let's trade with Moscow, why wouldn't he want that? Right? And that's what I saw. And again, like I've been saying, I don't know everything about the situation, and I could be proven wrong, but from what I understood and understand, that the actual Democratic elected, like what was his name? I forget his name offhand. It was actually quite a charming story, right? That the fellow who gets elected to be the president of Ukraine was a stand-up comedian who, because of all the strife and everything, I think the populace was very hungry for a leftist to come into power, right? And so this stand-up comedian suddenly becomes the president of Ukraine, gets put in this incredibly prominent position, and is actually like standing up against NATO and saying like, yeah, no, we're not going to sign like exclusivity documents saying that we can't trade with Russia, right? Like we're not going to do that. We're not just going to kowtow to NATO and the West, right? And so they fucking got rid of him. Yep, and they call those people separatists, Seraphim. They call those people separatists. That the people who are fighting against the coup, right, and fighting against the forces that overthrew their elected government, right, those people are called separatists. That's how it's reported. And so if you want to have the democratically elected leadership that you installed and had in power, then you're a separatist. Two-centuries-old imperialism isn't so... So, Victini, I'm sorry, what's your claim here? Is your claim that Russia is somehow fomenting and going... Like, I don't actually know what your claim is in regards to the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. And I think that's why I'm struggling with your comments. Because I don't really understand the position. Like, Ukraine is threatening because it's becoming more free. And... like, but it very explicitly isn't. Like there was a coup. Like NATO couped the Ukrainian government in 2014, and like that to me would tell, like I would be way more threatened by that if I was Putin. Like if I'm Putin, I'm very concerned about the fact that there is a country on my border that has been couped by NATO who is pushing in and then funding neo-Nazi groups. Like that would be very concerning to me if I was Russia. Zelensky is a product of democracy. All right, let's get our... Oops. Yeah, this is the guy, right? He's a Ukrainian actor, comedian, politician. Prior to his acting career. Yeah, this is the guy I was talking about. Announced a group of Ukrainians Russians were planning a coup against him. Again, guys, we're starting to get into territory where I gotta learn more. I gotta learn more on this subject. Like, it's really, really obvious to me that NATO is pushing in. But like, if I'm going to speak with authority on the nuts and bolts of this, I got to do a deeper dive than what I've been doing. Because, like, I'm just so fucking overwhelmed. And I'm feeling it right now. Like, I'm feeling it right now. And I think I've got to admit it to myself that I'm just, like, I'm feeling very, like, burnt out, you know? Burnt out. I'm feeling really, really burnt out. I've been really trying to keep on pace with it. I've been really trying to keep my feet on the ground and inform you guys and try to keep things going. But This chat that I'm having now is really starting to make me realize, like, if I want to become more of an authority figure on this subject, I've got to do a deeper dive. I got to do a deeper dive than this. So I think I'm just going to move on from this subject because I don't think I'm well equipped enough to handle some of and what you guys are doing isn't really even challenging, right? Like that's the thing that's really convincing me. Yeah, like no, but NATO is certainly expanding in the region, right? Like that's obvious. I think I've got the broad strokes, you know? Like I think I'm on the right path in terms of the broad strokes of this particular conversation. That obviously it's the West and NATO moving into Ukraine in order to foment discontent. I mean, we are funding neo-Nazi groups. We are doing all of that, right? That's definitely certain. But now I think I need to do heavier work in terms of the history of Ukraine and the history of its conflicts, because I don't know enough. And I would like to. And this conversation has really helped me see that. So thank you guys. As always, it's always a pleasure to speak with the chat. And boy, am I ever glad. We've had more than a couple of people come in here recently who are just kind of annoying. Right? Like that's the thing that I'm really grateful about the regulars and the people who come in here. So here is a claim, Victini. Here we go. We can have a conversation on this point. Russian imperialism and U.S. imperialism is the same. I disagree. I disagree that but Ukraine edging towards democracy, Russia threatened. I don't get me wrong. Like I think that Russia is certainly self-interested in its own power and its own size, right? It's certainly interested in its own prosperity, without a doubt. But like what it's doing on the world stage has absolutely nothing on what the United States is up to. Like it's not the same kind of imperialist force that the United States is. That when Russia pushes, it pushes generally. The Afghanistan moment is definitely one of those moments that countervails this, but it generally pushes its own borders forward, right? And it's always far more muddy than people like to say it is. So, for example, like the Poland case, right? Like people say of Stalin that he made an alliance with Hitler in order to carve up Poland. It's like that isn't actually what happened, right? It's actually much grayer than that, where Stalin made a non-aggression pact with Hitler, like the rest of Europe did, and they wanted to create a neutral zone, right? So that there was an agreement between the two of them that if Germany wanted to mess with Poland, well, Stalin wasn't going to mess with him so long as he didn't cross this line, right? Well, and then once Hitler does invade and seizes that territory, well, it destroys the fucking country and there's people fleeing and everything's chaos. And so Stalin moves in, right? Like, is that imperialism? Like, should these people just be left alone? And many people within Poland were asking Stalin to come in to help bring order to all of it. Because what do you think's going to happen if he doesn't? Right? Hitler's just going to keep on coming in. So I find that when it comes especially to like Russian politics and Russian militarism, especially along its own borders, it's usually very gray. Like there's a lot of, like the Crimea example is a really good example. Like the people of Crimea voted for that. They wanted to rejoin Russia, and that Russia, like, you can frame it as if it's like Russia swept in and stole Crimea away and it was military and like, or you can look at it as like, yeah, Russia moved military troops in to say like, yep, the people asked us to be here, here we are. right? Yeah, exactly. Stalin had suggested to intervene and overthrow Hitler with France and Britain numerous times, but Britain refused. People love bringing up the partitioning of Poland, but never mention the partitioning, of Czechoslovakia. Well, and also, like, I think it's fair to say, and it should be said, like, none of these guys are prophets. Like, sometimes I get into conversations with people, and they're like, it gets to that back chair quarterbacking kind of phase of like, well, they should have done, or they should have done this, or they could have done this. And it's like, okay, bud, but like, that's not how it works. Like, we got to deal with what happened, right? And what is happening. And we can't treat these guys like they're prophets. They don't know what the future has in store. And every decision they're making is a bit of a gamble and a bit of a gambit. Adam McPherson, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Yeah, Putin doesn't want NATO on his doorstep, which is honestly understandable given the political climate in America. Yeah, well, and America's goals, generally. Like, you don't even need to talk about political climate in America. Like, literally just talk about America's goals, which is the destruction of the rest of the planet for the benefit of themselves. Like, it's very straightforward. Yeah, and the number one reason why Russia doesn't want NATO in Ukraine is so nukes are not within 15 minutes of Moscow. Yep. Although now we've got like hypersonic missiles and shit. Like, do you even need to be in Ukraine? Do you even need to be doing that? Like, but it's just so insane. Okay, it's about power level and leverage. Nord Stream in Europe plus level of war in Ukraine is Russia's play. So, okay, Victini, I'm just trying to get a handle on your position, man. Like, so you think that what's going on in Ukraine has a lot more to do with Russia than I think I do, right? That, like, what I think is happening in Ukraine is that NATO wants to interfere with Russia, specifically in the Belt and Road Initiative, right? The rail from Moscow to Minsk and then Minsk to Warsaw, right, is a fairly significant threat to the hegemony of United States power. And so I'm of the opinion that NATO is going into Ukraine to and funding neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine so that they can disrupt this. That the Belt and Road Initiative is the jewel of, like, that's the prize, right? That's the objective. That's been my analysis up to this point. But you're saying that Moscow is actually more invested in the disruption of Ukraine, which I don't know if I understand that perspective. Like, why would it be that Russia would like to destabilize Ukraine in the way that it's been destabilized? And what do you see them doing in order to facilitate that destabilization? Because it does seem to me like the destabilization is happening in more serious ways from the NATO side of the conversation. But again, this is my perception as somebody who is also learning more about this. I just tend to view NATO as not the good guys in the conversation. And I mean, and I respect the position that somebody says that, well, there are no good guys. There's just forces that are pushing at each other. It's like, yeah, I understand that. Like, Putin isn't the greatest man in the world. Like, he's not. It's so funny. Yesterday we had somebody in here accusing me of loving Xi Jinping. And I got to tell you, like, when I compare, like, Xi Jinping to Putin, I'm like, yeah, I do love Xi Jinping compared to Putin. Like Putin is a fucking brute. Like, he's a bruiser. Like, he's a tough gentleman. He's a tough customer, man. Like, he's got a cutthroat kind of shrewdness about him, which I think you need in Russian politics. And it's funny because it seems like the Russians respect that. Like, it seems very much like if you're like this kind of ruthless strongman type, people really respect that. So hard to at the end of the day, man, like Putin does have the consent of his people to govern, right? Like, there's not a massive force attempting to overthrow him that you would expect. But Anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's just me being tired saying stupid shit. The Greater German Empire, Hungary and Poland got bits out of Czechoslovakia. Slovakia declared independence and became a Nazi puppet state. And Britain, Italy, and France signed the agreement that gave Germany the Sudetenland. Literally all of the things that people accuse Stalin of doing, Churchill did. Yeah, that's true. Like, and Churchill was brutal, right? Churchill was brutal. Like, Churchill oversaw like a genocide in India, and nobody gives a shit about it at all, right? Like, and like Churchill's statements were like explicitly racist. Like, I bet you I could Google it and find it like in 2 seconds, right? Churchill's racist statements, right? Like, if fucking CNN. Right, CNN is reporting on it. What's some of the Churchill's off the subject? He hated people with slit eyes and pigtails. To him, people from India were the beastliest people in the world next to the Germans. He admitted that he did not really think black people were as capable or as efficient as white people. Right? Churchill, who drank quite a bit of whiskey, gave a blunt reply. According to Wallace's diary, he said, "Why be apologetic about Anglo-Saxon superiority? That we were superior, and we had the common heritage which had been worked out over the centuries in England and had been perfected by our Constitution." Like, if Stalin had said any of this kind of shit, it would be constantly been thrust in our faces. Like, I would constantly be fighting with people about these sorts of statements, right? Like, but for whatever reason, like, it's Churchill, right? Well, I want more, right? In the other word, portraying. Anyway, and so like, and that's CNN, right? Right. Here's the Wikipedia article. So this is what the CIA has to say. They've got it like literally. The Aryan stock is bound to triumph. We will endeavor to advance the principles of equal rights of civilized men, irrespective of color. There you go. There can be no greater mistake than to attribute to each individual a recognizable share in the qualities which make up the national character. There are all sorts of men, good, bad, and for the most part indifferent in every country and in every race. Nothing is more wrong than to deny an individual on account of race or origin his right to be judged on his personal merits and conduct. There you go. Isn't that kind of a nice sort of phrase that you hear someone like Jordan Peterson say, right? So it's all about the meritocracy and all of that. We can ignore the segregation, right? We can ignore that completely. Yeah. Ugh. Okay, enough Churchill. Yeah, but we fought a war to stop the CEO of racism. More and more, dude, I'm looking at the, like, the Americans come into Germany because they see that the Germans are losing against the Soviets. That's really the difference. Like, that's really the thing. Like, the Nazis were going into the Soviet Union, and America was sitting there being like, good, destroy the Soviet Union, right? But once the Soviets started pushing back, and once the reports were saying that the Soviets were pushing in, suddenly the Americans were like, oh, we gotta leap in there to defeat Hitler. Yeah, we gotta defeat Hitler, everybody. Yeah, it's Hitler's. Yeah, suddenly these concentration camps that were well reported, we actually care about, right? And it's, in my view, it's 100% because they know if they didn't, if the Americans didn't actually push into Europe, the Soviets would have taken it, right? France was in no position to fight back. England was destroyed, right? Like, Italy and Germany were being defeated by the Soviets, and this land here was totally fucked. So, like, the Soviets were going to sweep through. And so the United States was just like, yeah, we're going to go defeat Nazis. That's what we care about. And then we spent, like, the next 40 years releasing a bunch of movies about how shitty the Nazis were and how bad they were, and now we're funding them. Like, it's all just a fucking grift, isn't it? It's all just a fucking grift. That the only reason we fought World War II at all was to make sure that the Soviets didn't take over Europe. That the real force that won World War II were the fucking communists, right? The communists defeated the capitalists as they attempted to invade the country, their country, right? And once again, the communists show that communist economies are more powerful than capitalist economies. And how do we know that's the case? Because the Soviets beat the Nazis. Here's my take. Taiwan is China. Ukraine is Russia. I mean, Taiwan is China this issue was never resolved. Like, that's how I view it, right? That, like, under Mao, he made it very clear that he wanted to go in and take Taiwan, rather. And the Americans prevented him. And that's basically where it's been from now until forever. And there's never been a declaration of independence by Taiwan, nor has there been a declaration of reconciliation by Taiwan. And so it's a moment that is caught in stasis. And that stasis exists because of Western intervention. That eventually China does move into Taiwan, right? And America won't stop them. Because by that point, China will be strong enough that it's like, are you going to die on this hill? Probably not. So, and then meanwhile, like, this relationship is a bit different. Like, is Russia actually part, like, Ukraine declared its own independence, right? Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I need to go on a much deeper dive with Ukraine. Declaration of Independence. Spelling. Yeah. 1991 Ukrainian independence referendum, right? Like, that to me, like, that's not nothing. Like, that we can't ignore this, right? That like, Taiwan has never declared its independence. Ukraine has. Right, and I'm of the view that should be respected, and so Ukraine is its own body, it's its own thing, but unfortunately, it exists in a world where that's not really possible. You either have to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative and this initiative that exists coming out of China, or you need to be part of the global banking system, right? Like, and the European nations are kind of both sidesing it to a degree, but eventually they'll have to choose. And under those two kind of choices, Ukraine, I think, was trying to be on both sides of it. And I think NATO and the United States basically looked at it and said, no, fuck that. If you're not going to pick a side, we're going to pick the side. Yeah, if you kill 10 people, you're a monster. If you kill millions, you're a liberator and a hero of the people. Yeah, honestly, American puppets are no different than Chinese and Russian puppets. Just an aside, but you did know medical debt in China is so relatable. Just an aside, but did you know medical debt in China is so relatable, it is included in the plot of very popular TV shows? Medical debt is so relatable in China. I was more or less of the opinion that they weren't experiencing it to the degree that the United States was. Again, it's worth digging into. Like, as always, like, I don't know everything about these countries, right? They weren't Soviets. Stalin did more damage to the communist brand than McCarthy did. Fight me. Oh boy. I can't fight you in a minute on that one, bud. I mean, I do disagree with that. I do disagree with that pretty strongly. That, like, I think it really comes down to the reality that I think people treat Stalin as if he was supposed to be some kind of god, when in the end he's just a man. Right? He's just a man, put a historical figure put into an incredible situation, and who led an incredible life. Like, Stalin's life is incredible. Like, it's an incredible life, and And he made mistakes. Like, the most obvious mistake was his inability to create a system that survived him, right? Like, but at the same time, like, it's pretty clear to me that Stalin believed in believed in Marxist principles and believed in principles of communism, and was really working and trying to grow and shape what communism was. And there are obvious and clear mistakes that exist, but I mean, at the same time, you kind of look at it and you go like, well, yeah, like, oh, you're telling me literally the first attempt to ever build a society on Marxist principles didn't work out? Shocker. Like, shocker. I'm blown away by that. No, I'm not. I'm not blown away by that at all, especially while there are, like, major antagonists. Right? And yeah, I think that's right. Stalin developed Marxism, Leninism as an ideology. I think he's an important piece of the puzzle. Like, he's not in my view, I actually think one of the things that really damages Stalin's the viewpoint of Stalin, or the reputation of Stalin, is that he wasn't really able, like, he and Trotsky acted like such fucking bro dudes to each other, dude. Like, it's so obvious. The more I learn about Trotsky and Stalin, the more I really do see, like, these guys were such fucking alpha male bro dudes to each other. Like, that maybe the relationships they were having with other people around them were different, but fuck, they never liked each other. From day one, they hated the shit out of each other. And, like, they couldn't see eye to eye on it. And so when Trotsky flees from Russia, he basically becomes like a anti-Soviet propagandist, right? Like, that's really the legacy of Trotsky in the end, is he's the reason why we have such a dim view of Russia, because you have this, like, really eloquent, well-spoken, spurned lover, not lover, but, like, spurned kind of guy who felt like he had to leave Russia, talking shit about the Soviet Union the whole fucking time. And I really do see that the relationship between Trotsky and Stalin is one of the great tragedies of the communist project. And I'm thankful that no such tragedy exists within China. That there were disagreements, like there were disagreements between Mao and Deng and all of this, like, and there certainly were disagreements, but there wasn't this kind of schism that occurred that really caused a lot of problems. He was a badass gangster for sure, and all countries were authoritarian during the Second World War. Well, yeah, and you find, like, people have pointed out to me, like, well, John, there was the Great Purge. And I'm like, well, yeah, like, somebody got assassinated, bro. Like, you're telling me that if Kamala Harris got assassinated, Joe Biden wouldn't do something about it? Like, I think you're nuts, right? Like, I just think that, like, it is in the interest of the West to smear the legacy of Stalin. That's really how I land on it. And there's a reason why they don't talk about Lenin, right? There's a reason why they don't talk about Lenin. That they're not interested in confronting Lenin. They're not interested in confronting Leninism, right? They go after the more controversial figure. And the more controversial figure, without a doubt, is Stalin, right? Because Stalin ultimately is a man of action. He's a man who wanted to push forward and was willing to push things forward, even if it meant upsetting the apple cart, right? Like, he obviously had, like, you think about the collectivization, right? He could have simply not done that. You know what I mean? Like, he very simply could have decided not to collectivize that and just say, well, there's the kulaks. We've got to deal with them. Here they are, right? But he decided not to. He chose to take action, right? And that makes him a more that's always the case. Men of action are always the more controversial figures from the people who are willing to let kind of events occur or the people who are trying to find different ways to get around sort of situations. And also, like, I think there is some credence. Like, Trotsky accuses Stalin of being an idiot, which I don't think is true, but definitely comparing Trotsky to Stalin, yeah, Stalin is not the more intelligent of the two. Like, Trotsky was a brilliant general, a tacticianer, a strategist, but at the end of the day, Stalin was the better politician, right? Which tells you that Stalin probably had a great deal of charisma, was probably very well liked by the people, understood how to talk to people, understood what they wanted, what their needs were, right? And he was also a man of conviction and principles. Like, Stalin is a very complex and interesting figure, just like Trotsky, just like Lenin. Like, they're all very complex and interesting figures. And I feel like the greatest, the greatest tragedy of all of it is that everyone feels like they need to take a side. Whereas I look at it and I go like, wow, what a crazy story. Like, all of these guys have such interesting perspectives, and the way that they're living their lives is so interesting and unfortunate, because they all came to a head and blew up on each other. And those lessons, China, I think, has tried really hard to learn from. Like, they saw what happened in the Soviet Union. They saw what occurred, and they weren't doing it with this kind of scoffing, oh, well, look, communism never works, scoff, 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 right? They weren't looking at it that way. They were looking at it like, okay, like, why did this fail? What were the pitfalls? How do we avoid them? And I think that's why you have China as you do today. Copays are 50% for people on the state health insurance. Yeah, dude, let's take a quick look. I'm at the end of the show here, but let's do it. And my statement on China and these sorts of issues is always going to be the same, which is that they're evolving and changing, and at least they're trying to evolve and change. Medical debt in China, right? You think about like the medical debt that exists here in the West, and it's like we're not even trying. So this is from 2016. Here we go. This is a nice one. What contributes to medical debt? Evidence from patients in rural China. Rural households in developing countries usually have severe medical debt due to high out-of-pocket OP payments, which contributes to bankruptcy. China implemented the critical illness insurance in 2012 to decrease patients' medical expenditure. The paper aimed to explore the medical debt of rural Chinese patients and its influencing factors. So this is kind of what I'm talking about. Like, here's a line right here. China implemented the critical illness insurance in 2012 to decrease patients' medical expenditure. Nothing like that's happening here. And so it looks to me like they've fallen for a very similar trap that America has fallen into, which is they've privatized sectors and all this. Yeah, I gotta go too. Let's pick this up though, Vixini. This is worthwhile. Because I don't want to have a purist view of China. Like, that's absolutely the last thing I'd like. All right, guys, I'm going to close it down. You guys are beautiful. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being living in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes that you won't realize it. Because if you don't, then they can treat you like a commodity and you'll accept it. Rebel, revolt, repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.